Morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. Are you familiar with Betteridge's law of journalism? It's quite a splendid one. It's a bit like Godwin's law with regard to the internet, where wherever the argument is, eventually someone will, or Goodwin's law, I beg your pardon, or Godwin's, oh God, flipping out. I've only been on air for 24 seconds and I've already fluffed it all up. Whatever the argument is, somebody involved in it will accuse the others of being Nazis at some point in the argument. The fellow who actually invented Goodwin's law came up with an exemption when Donald Trump announced his candidacy, or when his true colours began to emerge during his first tilt at the White House. And the inventor of the law actually said, no, in his case, it's all perfectly valid and justified. But generally speaking, the hyperbole involved in calling your online opponent a Nazi is neatly encapsulated. Betteridge's law of headlines is arguably even better. It's a technology journalist called Ian Betteridge in 2009 is believed to have come up with the idea, although the principle is older. The adage states that any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered by the word no. And you know how on this programme I have a slightly unhealthy fascination with the lengths to which the right-wing newspapers, often in conjunction with the sort of vampiric so-called think tanks of Tufton Street, will go in order to make you angry about things that aren't true, or about things that you shouldn't be getting angry about, or about utter nonsense. We have today certainly the finest example of the year so far of that practice. You may already have worked out what it is, but I'm going to tease you a little bit more and promise to reveal it a little later in the programme. So any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered by the word no. It's on at least one front page today, this story, although there's no question mark there. There is a quote from one of those so-called think tanks. But on page 2 of another of our regularly surveyed newspapers, there is a question mark. What story could it possibly be that is complete hogwash, but which right-wing newspapers will be using to try to annoy you or upset you or enrage you today? Stay tuned to find out, because we turn our attention first to a very different story. And it's a conversation that I want to get dead right context-wise, that there are some things that you just don't do in recent years in UK politics. And one of them is go after pensioners. It has been a truism or a fact of political life since at least 2010 that you do not go after pensioners. And that is why it was so jarring, so perhaps unexpected, and indeed so controversial when one of the very first things that the new Labour government did in government, in power, having achieved power, was to announce a cessation of the winter fuel payment for all but the poorest old age pensioners. It was a complete reversal of political traffic, and it has been covered accordingly. It sticks in your craw at first glance. You think two things if you lean towards equitable politics or the politics of decency. The first two things you think is, this isn't really what I thought the Labour government were going to do. And then you think, oh, come off it. You can't go after little old ladies. That's just absolutely outrageous. And then, and it's taken a few weeks for this to land, then you find yourself thinking, is this story quite as clean cut as I am being told it is? And it was, I look at threads sometimes on social media in pursuit of illumination. And I saw a claim yesterday from a slightly frenzied account. It wasn't a thread I was participating in, but I've got very well-attuned radars and antennae for, shall we say, overexcited contributors to social media discourse. That's a lovely phrase. Very overexcited. Do you know what that is? That is the equivalent for adults. I've only just invented this, but I'm going to be using it a lot more. You know when your mum and dad tell you, oh, he's tired. I'm not tired! When you're losing your temper or something, or you're a bit snappy, and mum and dad say, oh, he's tired. She's a bit tired. She's a bit tired. You're tired, darling. Going, I'm not tired. You're absolutely exhausted. Your eyes are being propped open with matchsticks. They're out on stalks. You're either hopped up to your eyeballs on Candy Floss and Sunny Delight, or you're absolutely shattered. But when mum or dad says, oh, he's tired, you're tired, we go bonkers, don't we? So on the other point with adults on social media, he's a bit overexcited. You're a bit overexcited. Calm. That's why that Michael Winner phrase, "Calm down, dear," worked so much. Probably people hate being told to calm. I'm not overexcited, but there was someone quite overexcited on social media, and they wrote, "Did you know that a quarter of pensioners are millionaires?" And I thought that can't be right. I mean, that just can't be right. That's a silly statement to make. So I did something that I urge everybody to do when they find themselves confronted with something that they think is probably not true. I had a look, and it's not technically true. What is true, though, is that 1 in 5 households in Great Britain is headed by an over 65 with a total wealth of over £1 million. And the data is quite old, so I'd have thought that it was likely only to go up. 1 in 4 people aged over 65 lived in a household with a total wealth of over £1 million. So a quarter of pensioners have assets in excess of £1 million. And an awful lot of the rhetoric in opposition to the cutting of winter fuel allowances for all but the poorest pensioners ignores the fact that that opposition involves continuing to give a few £100 a year to people who are already worth over £1 million. Now, let's get a couple of things out of the way early, shall we? So, if £300 a year is something that you're going to have to find yourself, but all of your money is tied up in your house, then in order to have it covered for 20 years, so from 65 to 85, you'd have to remortgage to the tune of £6,000. So what's 6,000 as a percentage of £1 million, Keith? Come on, mate. Pardon? 6,000 as a percentage of £1 million, please. Somebody? Come on, what do you think I'm doing this for my own entertainment? So £6,000 as a percentage of £1 million, and then you would have your winter fuel payment covered without dipping into more than X percentage. Let me get my messages open and see if you've got there before my production team have. And of course, that is often going to be in households where there are 2 people, where a couple will be residing. So it's £3,000 each over a period of 20 years or 10 years. Yes, 20 years, because you pay the same bills, don't you? 2 people in the same house paying the same bills. So £6,000 for people with assets in excess of £1 million. Easy. What is it? No, thank you, Keith. No, you beat. Oh no, sorry, you got beaten to it there by James. 0.6%. Okay, so 0.6%. And of course, the interest on whatever assets you've got, whether it's the property that's increasing in value or whether or not you've just got it in a savings account, is going to wipe out that 0.6% release of winter fuel payments overnight. So you've got the pensioners who will still get it, right? You've got the pensioners who are eligible for it but don't currently claim it, 880,000 of them. If you're eligible for pension credits, you get the winter fuel payment. A lot of people who are eligible for pension credits have not applied for it, okay? But they're entitled to it. So that increases the number of people who might be overexposed to the cut exponentially by almost 1 million. Almost 1 million people. The total number of pensioners is around the 12 million mark. Over 3 million of them have assets or live in households with assets in excess of £1 million. And then you've got everybody in between. So the reason I opened with the observation about the what's the phrase I'm looking for? The way in which in recent years we have not really countenanced the possibility of penalising pensioners or going after older people is because there's no real reason why we shouldn't. The polling, the most recent polling, Keir Starmer's personal approval is in free fall at the moment. It's plummeting at a rate at knots, but the party polling, most recently in the Independent, and this is from just 4 days ago, shows that pensioners are still more likely to support the Labour Party after the announcement of cuts to the winter fuel payment. So this is the weekly tracker poll for the Independent, and it shows Labour has increased its lead over the Tories from 10% on the day of the election to 12% today. So what we don't have is One poll does not the summer make, but the party is still the number one choice among pensioners aged 65 and over, registering about 19% compared to 14%, despite the fact that 10 million pensioners, there or thereabouts, of whom around about 3 live in households worth over £1 million, are set to lose their winter fuel payments. You've got don't knows, you've got wouldn't votes. You take them out of the equation, and Labour hit 33%, which is just 1 point below what they received on election day. So I want you to tell me, maybe as a younger person, I think as a younger person, no one's asked young people what they think about this policy. Young people who can't get houses, young people who can't. I see the point sometimes in entering the rat race when really for your generation, it's just a hamster wheel. But the simple question here is whether or not this cut is anything like as controversial as we have all sort of presumed that it is. If you define yourself as a younger person in the context of this policy, so you might be in your 40s, but you're 20 years off being affected by this. We accept the polling with a pinch of salt that says it doesn't appear to have touched Labour's support among pensioners. But how does it land with other people? Because one of the things I found quite strange, one of the things I found very strange about Brexit and about austerity and about all manner of other policies is that pensioners have grandchildren. I know for a fact that my mother and my mother-in-law, their political decisions, their political leanings are influenced by the impact they think it will have upon their children or their grandchildren. And that's why I've always found it odd that so many people from the older generations are so keen on policies that are quite punitive for the younger generations. I suppose most obviously Brexit, but with Brexit you've got to be kind, you've got to be generous and accept that a lot of people didn't realise just how terrible the lies of people like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Nigel Farage and Daniel Hannan and Mark Francois and Nadine Dorries and Andrea Leadsom and all the rest of them. They didn't realise how terrible, or either how stupid those people were or how terribly dishonest they were being. So you've got to be generous on Brexit, but still really, really, really hurting younger generations, taking away their freedom of movement, imposing economic sanctions on them, making it harder for them to trade with our nearest geographical neighbours, making it harder for them to buy stuff that's come in from continental Europe. All of these things always puzzled me because I found myself thinking, well, hang on, this is going to hurt your loved ones, it's going to hurt your children and your grandchildren, which is why I'm really interested today in what this policy does to younger people and where, well, I mean, do you know what I want to do? Listen, for the record, I don't like it. For the record, I make a list of people that should be targeted, and I immediately think of somebody sitting on their sofa with a blanket on their knees watching reruns of Last of the Summer Wine, and I think this is terrible. I also hate the thought of people who are frightened to turn on their heating, even though they can afford to do so, because some of the coverage has created the idea that they can't. But if I was Keir Starmer, I would not have done this. I don't think I would have done this. I don't feel the urgency. I look at so many other areas where money could be raised, and I don't see this. But that doesn't mean that I'm right. That figure today that I stumbled across is 27% or something of pensioners living in households worth over £1 million. And we're arguing about 200 or 300 quid a year going to them. I mean, is it possible that this is an oil tanker that needs to turn around? Is it possible that they actually know what they're doing? For the record, I don't like it. But our job here is to focus upon facts, to focus upon figures, not to focus upon feelings. So I've just described my feelings to you. I don't like it, but I can't sit here and justify a continuing state handout for people living in households worth over £1 million, when most people in their 20s, 30s, even perhaps 40s, can't imagine having assets at all. So if you see yourself as a younger person, and I don't want any meanness, I don't want any unpleasantness. If you see yourself as a younger person, no one's really asked you what you think about this. Well, I am. 0345 6060973. I think anything below 50 works, really. But obviously the younger you are, the more pertinent your contribution becomes. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. What do people furthest away from being affected by cuts in winter fuel allowance think about cuts in winter fuel allowance? And tell me honestly whether or not the news, and I don't think you would have known this before, or at least I didn't, that over a quarter of pensioners live in households worth over £1 million. I'm going to say that again. Over a quarter of pensioners live in households worth over £1 million. And the direction of media traffic since this policy was announced has essentially portrayed them all as paupers who are going to be smashing the ice upon the surface of their wells before they can wash their fizzogs in the morning. Have we all gone a bit mad on this story? Or is it actually a profound affront to both Labour values and common decency? The number you need is 0345 6060 973. It is a quarter of pensioners Bill says in Fife. Are you sure it wasn't a quarter of pensioners in Richmond or Mayfair? Mate, I didn't believe it. I've got to be honest with you, my mum's way off being in this category of pensioners. And listen, you're welcome to quibble. I don't think you get into Idiot's Corner if you say you've gone from a fifth to a quarter. No, a fifth of heads of households and then a quarter of pensioners. So that's the difference between just counting one pensioner in a household worth over £1 million and counting two. So the statistics are solid. If you follow me on X, you can see the full fact of dug into this and all of the statistics are there. And it's the facts are challenging my feelings today, and those are often our favourite conversations. My feelings are the same as many other people's. So how can you possibly be going after pensioners, especially as a Labour Party? And then the facts are, well, hang on a minute. Is there a wealthier cohort in our society than people who've passed the age of 65 in recent years? I'm not sure there is, you know. Alex is in Edinburgh. Alex, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
So I'm 31 and I have very little sympathy with the people complaining about this. Recently, I've seen on social media that people are making out that no pensioners will be receiving it, and it's been a cut for everyone.
Yes.
Whereas in reality, what happened is last winter, you had millionaires receiving this benefit, whereas at the same time, you had a single mother on minimum wage raising two children not getting it, struggling and having to raise two children. The idea that that situation was acceptable or fair, I think was very wrong.
I'm struck by, I know it's only one poll, it's the only one I could find, that Labour's still very strong among pensioners, because I don't want to indulge in lazy stereotypes about pensioners generally being in favour of stringent financial policies that affect younger people, that don't affect them. What we can't ignore, and this is why I think Martin Lewis's idea about just not giving it to people according to their council tax, but someone's told me that's Martin's idea. It sounds a little bit simplistic for Martin, so I shall check before repeating it. But there are going to be people who are sort of £5 off the threshold to receive £200, and that always stinks, doesn't it?
I suppose it does, but it is going to be means tested based on income, and the pensioners who are worst off will be able to receive this and pension credit.
That they will be fine, but the people who just miss out on pension credit, it's always going to feel unfair for them, isn't it?
Yes, but there are working age people who have to endure the same hardships on the same level of income.
and so you're looking at a pool of people who have grievances, potentially valid grievances. You're politically acknowledging that you cannot address all of them. So you choose which ones you help, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. But I do have limited sympathy with this generation because they are the golden generation of history. This generation has never had it better and probably will never have it better.
That's it now. Certainly in terms of ownership. The idea of ending up with assets worth in excess of £1 million without owning your own home is pie in the sky. Unless you win the lottery, it's completely impossible. And that uptake, I think that Rachel Reeves told Nick Ferrari yesterday that the number of people who've applied for it who didn't previously get it, they're going to be getting £3,000 a year plus the £200 to £300 of winter fuel payment. So it lands right with you. I mean, how representative do you think you are of your generation?
I think very representative, because I think we're going to have a hard time. And the discussion amongst my peer group is, when it comes to us hitting retirement age, we think there's a good chance the state pension will not exist at that point, because of the demographics. It will be financially unviable.
This is the demographic time bomb that we talk about with our teeth clenched with increasing regularity on the programme. Thank you, Alex. Ollie's in Brighton. Right, it's Morning Jones. I'm 23. I know my grandparents are sitting on their house, as you describe, and do not need the winter fuel payment. Cutting it from them is right and fair. But knowing someone on pension credit to be just above that threshold will be, well, no, on the pension income is not enough to get pension credit. That threshold will be worrying, and the red line drawn for them is fundamentally too low and needs looking at. That would be a rabbit from the hat in the budget, wouldn't it? If there were to be what felt like a slightly more equitable taper, but there are always going to be people on the wrong side of it. Is it possible that we've all allowed our feelings to override the facts on this one? If you're not surprised to learn about the percentage of people aged over 65 living in households with assets worth in excess of £1 million, then I can't quite see how you could have the same opinion about this that you had before you learnt that fact. Mark's in County Durham. Mark, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm just saying that I feel it's blown out of proportion, because, for example, my mother-in-law is returning from a third foreign holiday, and she'd be outraged she's not getting it.
Yes, so you are having a bit of a swing at your mother-in-law here, which is perfectly allowable.
And my parents don't need it either. I mean, when you know that, it's something like 4 out of 5 pensioners have other income other than the state pension, apparently.
Yes, but and they're the ones that are guaranteed to lose the winter fuel allowance, because in order to get it, you're basically surviving on the state pension and nothing else.
Which is a limited amount of people, actually, in reality, I feel. I mean, the problem is people who are working, who are paying mortgages, who are on low national minimum wage, probably have less disposable income. And things like that. I mean, my kids obviously are trying to buy houses, etc.
And how does Grandma feel about that? So when you, because I wonder whether we're being a bit, or what's not you, forgive me, Mark, whether I'm being a bit idealistic when I talk about people, young people taking into account the impact that policies are going to have on their parents and grandparents, and vice versa, grandparents. So your mother-in-law's on her third foreign holiday of the year. Where's she gone, actually, in case anyone's unclear about who you are and who you're talking about?
I think I'll leave that one to.
But how? I mean, does she see any links at all between the financial plight of her grandchildren and her own considerable comfort?
Probably not.
No,
because she.
And why would she?
Yeah, I mean they are. The disposable income of much better. I mean, I'm the in-between bit. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm the person who's managed to get onto the housing ladder. I've just paid my mortgage off in my late 50s. Yeah. And I'm going to be, but I had to work, I had to work for that. I had to, and all that sort of stuff. And I've only just managed that, but I understand that my kids' mortgages may not be able to be paid off in their late 50s.
And that's if they're lucky enough to be part of the mortgage paying class in the first place.
For me, the only debate really is where the line is drawn.
And that Labour have allowed that to run away, haven't they? I think.
Yeah,
that's bad politics.
Been a campaign. I feel there's been a campaign nationally and locally. I mean, if I look at the local Facebook groups, the local newspapers, it's all this myth of an old woman sitting with no heating on.
Well, it's not. I mean, there will be people like that, but they can
they're not the majority.
No, and even so, I don't think we want anybody to be in the situation that you describe. But I'm not 100% convinced that anybody will be, but precisely because of the 880,000 strong cushion of people who didn't realise they were eligible for this and will end up with thousands of pounds more than they were getting previously, while people like your mother-in-law end up 200 or 300 quid worse off, which is what, a couple of dinners out on the trip to on the third foreign holiday of the year. And Roger in Brentwood, shame on you, he writes, sorry, the facts are disputable. My mother-in-law has a property valued at over £1 million, but she hasn't enough to fix her roof or replace her ageing and now failing boiler. I'm surprised you're falling for this flim-flam. Roger, I see you. Tell your mother-in-law to take some equity release. Reduce the amount of money that you and your wife are set to inherit from her when she dies, and she can fix the roof and have a brand new boiler by tea time today. If you need any numbers of good plumbers, I'll be happy to furnish them with you. That's terribly greedy of you. How dare you accuse me of falling for flim-flam when you're already spending the money you're set to inherit from your freezing cold mother-in-law with the leaky roof? Disgusting. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. I want a law named after me. I want a law of journalism named after me. Why has Betteridge got one? Betteridge's law of journalism, or Betteridge's law of headlines, is that any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered by the word no. And it is because of the manipulations and the excesses of the right-wing newspapers in this country that I put a lot of people... I spare a lot of people a trip to Idiot's Corner. I do think that so much effort is put into you to persuade you to believe stupid things or untrue things that when you come back at me with the opinion derived from the lies that you've been fed, I have to be careful not to punish you for the sins of the liars you have believed. So here's a good one. If the Tories had brought this in, you'd be spitting nails. I said, well, the Tories brought in payments of hundreds of pounds to the richest people in the country. And I was spitting nails. So I can't also spit nails when Labour tries to take it away. I mean, removing £200 or £300 a year from people who are worth over £1 million shouldn't even be controversial. The controversy begins the further down that list you go. So if 3 million people are worth over £1 million, pensioners are living in households worth over £1 million, how many are living in households worth over £500,000? Listen, I come from a privileged background, but I still haven't included my mum. My mum's still not on this page. My mum's comfortably off as an old age pensioner. Not comfortably off, but she's okay. She hasn't got assets of £500,000. They spent all the money on my school fees. So if it's a quarter of pensioners in households worth over £1 million, how many would it be if you brought that down to £500,000? I couldn't find the figures this morning. Perhaps you can. So people who've got assets in excess of £500,000 a year being given hundreds of pounds by successive Tory government. I honestly wonder whether the job of a Labour government is to come in and take it away. But because we're easily emotionally manipulated about older people, I think it's a nice evolutionary trait to look after older people. The Spartans would have chucked them off a cliff at the point at which they became economically unproductive. I think that possibly we've got this entire story backwards. Should we be giving hundreds of pounds a year to people worth over £500,000? Well, don't be ridiculous, James. But we are. The Labour government has come in and said we're going to stop. Go on, riddle me that. Don't make silly points about the Tories or comparing coverage because, if the Tory government announced it was giving hundreds of pounds to the richest people in the country, I would have been up in arms. So why would we not be supportive of a left-wing government coming in and taking hundreds of pounds away from the richest people in the country? And we're constantly returning back to that little caveat of the people who are going to be unfairly penalised by thresholds. But that's the nature of thresholds. Do you want a bit of inside gossip? Well, it's not inside gossip because they've both declared it publicly. I look at what my younger colleagues are doing. None of us on LBC have got the same politics. But Ben Kentish, very powerful, brilliant young presenter if you haven't checked him out yet. Very powerful stuff on this about what it's like to be young. I still feel like the young pretender at LBC because I was so much younger than everybody else when I arrived here, but I'm not anymore. Tom Swarbrick is younger than me, although he may not always sound like it. He's been very persuasive and instructive on this issue. Looking at it all through the lens of the oldest, richest generation seems to me to be actually, the more we talk about it, the more bonkers it is. 10:38 is the time. Chloe is in Cairn in Wiltshire. Chloe, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. So I've got 3 members of my family who receive the winter fuel allowance who absolutely, categorically do not need it.
Do they think they do? Or do they think they deserve it?
No.
Because need and deserve are different things, aren't they, I suppose?
No, they don't think they need it. Actually, my parents split the money between myself and my brother to help us with our bills.
Gosh, that's nice.
Over the winter period, because they don't need it. It's the most ridiculous policy that they put into place that I've ever heard. For the first time in a very long time, I actually think a government is making quite a sensible decision by means testing people to ensure that the money is going to people that actually need it. My grandmother is very well off.
Yes.
It's just insanity.
Have you thought that all along? Have you been wondering who the heck is recognising the reality of your situation every time you turn on your radio or open a newspaper? Because so much of this is self-evident.
It's so the state of things for I'm 35 is absolutely horrific at the moment, in my opinion. I can't see it getting any better anytime soon. And things like this, when they put this policy into place, I thought, oh, here we go again.
Yes.
I mean, we must be so rich as a nation to be giving out £300 willy-nilly.
To people who are in possession of assets that most people half their age are unlikely ever to accrue or enjoy.
Exactly, and the reality is I'm probably never going to be able to retire.
I've got friends in their 60s who've done equity release already because the cost of living and also the wanting to wind down the work a little bit. They don't have children, so they're not that fussed about passing it on to the next generation. If you've got £500,000 worth of house and you reckon you can't afford to pay your fuel bills, why should anybody else be paying them?
Precisely. Just take a look at yourself, I think. A lot of these pensioners, I'm sure, would be much happier if that money went into the NHS, that they can, there won't be such a long waiting list for a hip replacement. I just think it is just absolutely insane to be giving money out like this, as if we've got loads of money to be giving out like this.
Well, did you say you're in your mid-30s? How old did you say you were? If you did indeed. I hope I'm not being on. Yeah, see, I think there's a generational disconnect here. Let me read you a text. It's not one for Idiot's Corner, although I think the unkindness at the end is unnecessary. So if their house is worth over £500,000 but they've got no money, we pretend they are rich. You're all over the place since Labour have got into government.
No.
I mean, for people who have no assets at all, what does £500,000 look like?
I don't actually think that. I don't actually think this has got anything to do with politics, actually. I think it's just being a bit sensible with money.
Gosh.
I think you can't just give out £300 willy-nilly.
To people who've got the most.
Yeah.
By definition.
Precisely. Exactly. It's just ridiculous. And people that probably think, we should carry on with this are probably in the same boat as people saying, oh, stop the boats and don't do that.
Or the two-child limit. I think, I'm more troubled by keeping the two-child benefit cap than I am by the removal of the winter fuel payment, for all of the reasons that we've explored while examining the wisdom of removing the winter fuel payment. It's a funny one, isn't it? I like the things that are... Well, is that the right use of the word shibboleth? Do you know what shibboleth means, Chloe?
Yeah.
What does it mean?
Just not being careful, just, not being sensible with money.
No, I sprang that on you. That wasn't fair. That's not what shibboleth means. I think you misheard. What does shibboleth... do you know what it means?
Shriveling.
No, not that. Do you know what shibboleth means?
No.
No, nor do I. But I've got a feeling that it's the right context in which to use that word. Is it a shibboleth that old people need financial protection, or that it is wrong to take money away from... Is it a shibboleth? Yeah, have I used it correctly? Hallelujah! Hang on, let me read you the definition. A custom or principle or belief distinguishing a particular class or group of people, once regarded as outmoded or no longer important. I've not quite got it right, have I? Because it's not yet. We want to turn it into a shibboleth. I don't know. But anyway, is it possible that we've all swallowed the Kool-Aid on pensioners needing more money, but the news that, God knows how many of them have got £500,000 in assets already kind of turns that on its head. Or maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm missing something huge. So give me a call and tell me. 0345 6060 973. Amy's in Solihull. Amy, what would you like to say?
Hi. So I sort of wanted to agree with some of the earlier callers. I think It's almost unfair when you consider that a lot of people saw in the last couple of years their mortgages go up, working families, and their fuel's gone up. So the fact that they don't get the same benefit is sort of quite unfair if you think about it.
Yes, and I'd go a little further and suggest that the younger you are, the more sacrifices you made to look after older people during lockdowns.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that I see on social media that are sharing it, but they, like one of your earlier callers said, they're going on holiday all the time. They sit on all these assets that they accrue interest on and that often get a passive income from as well. To think that I know people that, like in my family, that might have retired early and they've not yet getting the pension.
And good luck to them. And good luck to them. But do they feel that they need the winter fuel? Are they cross that it's been taken away? Because I always say that I want budgets in which I pay a little bit more tax, and I mean it. But when it lands, when you see it on your first pay slip and you're paying more than you were before the budget, there's a little bit of you that goes, "Oh, I could have spent that on cola cubes." Do they resent the removal, even though it won't really affect them at all financially?
I've not actually spoken to some of them about it, but I know that there will be some that those that are probably really well off aren't that fussed by it, but there's others that won't see the irony when they're complaining about it. What I've not heard? On the cruise.
Do you know what I've not heard anyone suggest? That if they're worried about paying their bills after losing the winter fuel allowance, they should cancel their Netflix subscriptions or eat fewer avocado toasts in the morning. I don't know why that. I mean, why is that absent from this discourse? Cancel your Netflix subscription. Listen, this is horrible. This is the rhetoric of evilness. But every time young people reveal the difficulty of their financial situation, this is what lazy old bigots tell them. Well, why don't you cancel your Netflix subscription? Or why don't you eat fewer avocados? Why don't you downsize? Have you thought about downsizing? This is young people working and struggling to get even a foothold of permanence in the cliff face of financial security. And when they complain about their plight, they're told to suck it up, snowflake. They're told that they don't know what hard work really is. They're told that they spend all their money on holidays and smartphones. Avocado. Am I the only person in the world who still says avocado pears? Yeah, I am. All right, I'll try and stop. Avocado toasts. That sounds stupid, avocado toasts. Avocado breakfasts, a succulent avocado breakfast. Or they're told to spend less money. And no one ever says that here to people who have already got assets in excess of £1 million. And that's over a quarter of them. I think we've got this horribly wrong. I really do. But there's 10 minutes for you to tell me, au contraire, mon frère, it's you that's got things wrong. But just explain it to me with, what we like on this programme. Facts. And after this hiatus, I will reveal to you the story that at least 2 right-wing newspapers have run up the flagpole this morning, despite knowing that it contains precisely no facts. Time, gentlemen, please. It is 10 minutes to 11. Shall we do the story that plumbs ever newer depths of patronising and insulting readers? Would you be interested in that one? So, front page of the Telegraph today, pubs may have to call last orders early in fresh nanny state blow. What's the first thing you think when you hear or read something like that? Shall I tell you the first thing? I can't tell you the first thing I think when I hear or read something like that. I can give you a clue, though. Do you know what those little holders on the side of rowing boats are called? Do you know what they're called? Those little sort of cup-shaped brackets into which you insert the oars. Do you know what they're called? Yes, it rhymes with that. So that's the first thing I thought when I read that story on the front page of the Telegraph today. I got 3 or 4 paragraphs into it and I saw they were quoting the head of lifestyle economics at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And do you know what word entered my head? Do you know what those little metal brackets are called on the side of rowing boats that you put the oars in? But, don't take my word for it that it's all complete rollicks. Turn instead to the Daily Mail, where something called Betteridge's law of headlines kicks in spectacular fashion. Is nanny state Starmer set to cut pub hours? Now, I do quite a lot of things on your behalf so that you don't have to. And I'm not going to lie, I sometimes think that I don't get the credit I deserve. I don't get the gratitude I deserve for example, reading all the way to the end of a Daily Mail article so that you don't have to. So the question is nanny state Starmer set to cut pub hours? Betteridge's law of headlines states that any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered by the word no, and the final paragraph of the Daily Mail story asking whether or not the Labour Party is set to cut pub hours, something reported without even the courtesy of a question mark on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, replete with a quote from the so-called Institute of Economic Affairs, a health department spokesman said, "It is categorically untrue that the government is considering changing alcohol licensing hours." Oh, let's have a phone in on it. Here's something that's categorically untrue. Give me a ring and tell me how you would feel if it was actually true. Why don't I pretend that it is true for 10 minutes and then invite you to ring me up and tell me how angry you are about something that has already been denied in the articles that I'm dragging the story from. That is how the right-wing media works, just in case you were under any doubt at all. And the more we talk about it, the more we wonder whether the winter fuel allowance has been similarly mangled. This is from another James. I'm 28, and I think I've fallen into the media trap about how wrong it is for Labour to scrap the allowance. After hearing the facts that you've mentioned, James, I now see it. My dad's dad has a £700,000 house and an apartment in Spain. He can certainly do without the allowance. However, my mum's mum is on the lower side. Labour need to choose carefully who loses the allowance. And the problem is that the existing threshold, the point at which you receive pension credit, is free. You see what I mean? It already exists. You've already got some people on this side of it and 10 million people on the other side of it. 880,000 people didn't realise they should have been on the winning side of it, as it were. And they've now been encouraged. I think they've taken on 4,000 members of staff in order to help people process that. You can ring up and go through it. Again, scaremongering about how many questions you'll have to answer, how many pages there are. You can ring up and be guided through it all by a DWP staff member, and they've hired extra to help you. So that is the problem. If you brought in different thresholds, possibly council tax would be a good way of doing this as well, because it already exists. But then, council tax is probably the least fair tax in the entire country anyway. If you brought in a more complicated threshold, a taper, you might end up paying more money than you that makes it worthwhile. I don't think you'd end up paying more money than you save, but it might make the whole process a little bit pointless. These are the facts. These are important. 10:54 is the time. Holly is in Telford. Holly, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just think with the fuel allowance at the moment, I think we're living in a time of entitlement from both pensioners and from younger generations.
Go on.
It's hard to explain, but I feel like a lot of older generations, obviously, they quite rightly feel like they've worked very hard for what they have and they shouldn't have to give that up. So
not necessarily, Holly. Some of them were right lazy gits.
No, I completely understand that. I think there's sides to that with both the elderly and the young. But I believe that, a lot of them want to hold on to what they have. But then there are younger generations that want to wait to have what their parents have to pass on to them. And so I feel like there's just this little bit of entitlement lingering in the air when these sort of things come in and out of government. And I do believe that it affects the way that people think about it. And I mean, my dad's 77. He's not in any means on the richer side of the pensioners. But my granddad was. So it's been a really big juxtaposition to sort of look at throughout the years and sort of witness.
But if you've got, that's the problem, isn't it? Does your dad own his own home?
No, so my dad he's been in the same house for 25 years now, but he ended up becoming a single parent when I was in my early teens. And so he ended up having a company buy his house out for him. So he lives there. Then when he passes, the rest that house.
So he gets an income. He gets an income, but there's no asset to pass on to you.
Yeah, there's no asset to pass on to me.
And that income pushes him out of any hope of getting the pension credits or the winter fuel allowance.
Yeah, basically. But
that makes him well off. For people listening to this who are trying to live on a state pension alone, your dad's quite well off.
It's not exactly enough, though, because he has a lot of disabilities. He has to have a lot of care for him.
Yes.
And
then he's probably still eligible if he's in receipt of other benefits. That will impact upon the winter fuel situation.
But it's just been, I do think there is an air of entitlement from both sides.
Describe the young person's entitlement to me? Because I don't see that. I see a really bad deal. I speak as someone in their 50s, so I'm smack in between the two generations you describe, and you're in your 20s. I think compared to people who are 20 or 30 years older than me, people who are 20 or 30 years younger than me have got the shoddiest end of the stick. And a lot of the time you don't even realise, because you can't compare your life today to what your life would have been like when I was your age, when I was 28.
Yeah, I do.
So where does entitlement among young people, what do you point at when you want to prove that?
I think that we want to expect to get more out of life, which is completely fine. But
that's not entitlement, that's ambition.
Hard. It is ambition, but entitlement, I think people expect to, if they have a job,
you expect to get what your parents get if you work as hard as they did.
Yes,
and you're not going to. So I really don't see where entitlement comes in. That sounds to me like injustice, generational injustice.
Possibly. But I still think that a lot of us are just waiting for parents to pass so that we can see what we get from them.
Yeah, and that's awful. And that's a situation that we've been put into by failure to build houses and the fetishization of property price increases and a very deliberate, often by companies making donations to the Tory party, a very deliberate policy of strangling supply in order to see demand rocket. But again, you're unlikely to see this explained in any of the media outlets that have been spending the morning pretending that there's a threat to pub opening times in order to spook the horses. Holly, take care. I might have to start wearing varifocal lenses in the studio. I nearly said Bath is in East Sussex, but which is not true, either geographically or nomenclaturally. It's Beth, and she's in East Sussex. Beth, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How are you?
Very well. I haven't got long. Sorry, I should have waffled less.
Okay, I just wanted to say, I think the way that the media has gripped this story about the winter fuel payments as an attack on pensioners is wholly unfair, because when LBC was having conversations about the child benefits cap, there were callers that sounded a bit older coming on the show saying, why are people having children they can't afford?
Yes.
Tough luck. Get on with it. You could deal with it. I don't have that opinion. I'm in my late 20s. I don't think pensioners should just, quote-unquote, get on with it. But a lot of pensioners are living in mortgage-free, rent-free houses that they were able to buy when they're younger. They've done everything right. I'm not saying they've done anything wrong, but I'm not that there's as many pensioners going to freeze as the media's trying to pretend.
Well, I don't want any pensioners to freeze, and that is going to be the acid test, isn't it? Because people were dying of cold, according to NHS figures, under every single year of the 14 years of Tory rule that we've endured, and it's a nuanced statistic because we don't know quite what it means, or at least I don't. You might, but the Health Service concludes that illnesses that have been caught, if you like, as a consequence of coldness, that would contribute to these sort of things. But it's never merited a single headline, or at least a single opinion piece in all the years that it was going on. What we don't know is whether, as energy bills are coming back down again now after the crisis, whether or not people are going to be unduly exposed to problems. And if they are, that's on Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves and Angela Rayner and all the rest of them. But in the meantime, the idea that someone who is comfortably off to the tune of 500,000, never mind 1 million, which constitutes about a quarter of pensioners' households, need an extra 200 or 300 quid a week a year, 200 or 300 quid a year is, it's actually insane. Although at 10 o'clock this morning, I thought it was valid. It just goes to show what happens if you think about things, doesn't it? It'll never catch on. It is 4 minutes after 11, and this wasn't going to go in the programme today. I mentioned to you, look, even on here on my printout, it says 9:57. Is that the time it dropped, or is that the time that we printed it out? Is that the time we printed it out? Let's pretend it's the time it dropped. It only dropped at 9:50. Hey, fake news, guys. Come on, pot kettle. I wasn't going to talk about this. It is box fresh. It is only from this morning, and the only reason I wasn't going to talk about it is because I didn't know. I missed it. It hasn't been picked up as widely as you might expect. I quite like the anti-monarchy group Republic. I felt they were very shoddily treated on the day of the coronation. It was quite an interesting insight into what Tory laws regarding peaceful protest were potentially going to be used for. In fact, speaking of protests, whatever the opposite of peaceful is, violence. I think it was published yesterday, but it's been updated overnight. Violent protest, Yvette Cooper turning her attention to that. I think we'll catch up with a little bit of that speech later this hour with Henry Riley, who's part of LBC's top team. All the big players for LBC are in Liverpool at the moment. I'm James O'Brien, live in Leicester Square. The real cost of the royal family, according to this report from Republic, is £510 million a year. Republic have put the funding together in, I would say, a creative way, but not a irresponsible way. They look at, for example, how much money the country or the state might accrue if we had ownership of the royal buildings, or if we could do with the royal buildings whatever we as a population wanted to do. Security is a huge expenditure for the royal family. That's not included in the sovereign grant, which looks at staffing, travel and the upkeep of royal buildings. So the sovereign grant stands at about £96 million, I think. But if you take in all the other factors identified by Republic, if you're looking at lost income, if you're looking at the property businesses run by the Duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall, if you're looking at security costs, if you're looking at property profits, if you're looking at all of that, then the grand total, 86 million, the annual sovereign grant, the grand total comes in at more than 5 times that. I've just realised that Rolex is Rolox. Did you realise that? I've used that phrase all my life, often on the radio when I can't say the phrase that rhymes with it, that I want to say when I say Rolex instead of. It's Rolox, isn't it? You've sent it to me, written down, and therefore I've seen it, and so it's that you're locking your rower, or locking on your row, Rolox or Rolex. Sorry, if you weren't listening to the first hour, you've got absolutely no idea what I'm saying. It's pronounced Rolex. It's one of those sort of pronunciation glitches that are so popular in the English language. Oh, I had one yesterday that made me laugh. You know, when I look, we'll get stuck into the royal family in a minute, but this is actually a conversation about privilege. I don't know how familiar you are with the absolutely exceptional historian William Dalrymple. Are you familiar with him? His new book, The Gold Road, about India from sort of 250 BC until about 1200 AD. I'm getting stuck right into it, despite interviewing him yesterday. I didn't have time to read it all before. It's just extraordinary. The man's a genius. It turns out we went to the same school, and he's a guest on Full Disclosure next week. So I don't know how much of Full Disclosure is going to be of interest to ordinary people who didn't go to the same school as us, but we did chew a little bit of fat about common ground. And I mispronounced his name. I teased him a bit about it at the end because I've always called him Dalrymple, Dalrymple. He does the Empire podcast with Anita Anand as well. He's a brilliant communicator, brilliant historian, art historian, writer. But that's the thing. You notice when you're from Kidderminster and you start knocking around with toffs, you notice they've got a code sometimes, even there. So I introduce him at the top of the Full Disclosure podcast, and I should have noticed because I've listened to his podcast. I should have noticed, but I just didn't. It didn't clock. I introduced him as William Dalrymple, and then halfway through the podcast, in a very kind of casually patrician fashion, he uses his own name and says Dalrymple, and I thought, oh dear, it's like that time at school when I mispronounced anchovy as anchovy. I got teased about it for a term and a half. I'd never seen an anchovy before. We don't catch any anchovies in Kidderminster, just sticklebacks down in Broadwaters. So those little codes. Anyway, I'm just mentioning that because we're about to start talking about privilege. Here's one of O'Brien's laws of journalism. Or can we do O'Brien's laws of phone-ins? O'Brien's law, because Betteridge has got his own law of headlines. If there's a question mark in the headline, the answer is always no. O'Brien's law of phone-ins, and then we can try and break the rule. When's the last time you heard a phone-in about the royal family that really slapped? What did you say? Don't say slapped. Was it? Okay. When's the last time you heard a phone-in about the royal family that really landed? That really sang? Can I say sang? Am I too old to say the other thing? Oh, that's a bit harsh. Well, okay. Well, this has all gone a bit awkward. Are you sure? Really? Okay, no, fine. When's the last time you heard a radio phone-in about the royal family that really sang, that really pushed your buttons? Is that okay? That really pushed your buttons? That really landed? I think, in all the years I've been doing this job, and I'm going to blame you for this, it's all about the qualities of the callers. I think I've only done about 2. I gave up on it years ago. I'll tell you when it came back to life for me was when everybody was being so vile and racist about Prince Harry's wife, about Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex. And as always with radio phone-ins about racism, you could get a few people to ring in to be really, really racist while insisting that they weren't racist, and you could just sort of tug on one tiny little thread of their vest, their Union flag vest, and the whole thing had come falling down around their buttocks. So that's when things got interesting for me about the royal family again. And then I think there was that terrible moment when the late Queen bailed out her son, who was accused of sex offences, and settled with the accuser to the tune of several £1 million. But generally speaking, abolition of the monarchy phone-ins don't work. But today it feels like we really need to talk about this, not least because the chief executive of Republic, literally in the 3rd paragraph of the BBC's coverage of the story, writes, how can we talk about cutting the winter fuel allowance while wasting £500 million on the royals? What should the royal family look like? And I like this question because it is a universal invitation. Absolutely anybody can answer this question. You can tell me the royal family should look exactly like it looks today, that it's incredibly good value for money, that to in any way reduce their expenditure, which I think is something that the king is quite keen to do, at least in some quarters. We'd be lost without it. It is all the way a good thing. Or you can go all the way towards abolition. It's a superb Sue Townsend book. Have you read it? I can't remember what it's called, but someone will remind me in a minute. Sue Townsend of Adrian Mole fame. She wrote a book which is essentially just transplanted the entire royal family to a council estate in Leicester. It was a beautiful piece of literature. Sue Townsend, one of my all-time favourites, by the way, and by no means is her genius confined to the Adrian Mole stories, although they are exemplars of comedic literature. But she absolutely, The Queen and I think it was called, transplants the entire royal family to a council estate in Leicester with nothing. They just literally, it all gets chopped off overnight. Not their heads, we're not French, just their income, their privilege, their houses, the civil list or whatever it's called this week, the sovereign grant, all of it. It's gone. That's it. We'll give you a council house in Leicester. So frankly, you're jumping the queue, but you count yourself lucky. The titles have gone. Everything's gone. It's a superb book. In fact, I shall check. Can we check Amazon now and see how many people have bought it by the end of the press? See if its chart position goes up. It's the only way you can do it live. Although obviously you should support your local bookshops. That's why I want to do this today. Because if we say what should it look like, and why do you think that, then we open the door to everybody from the flag-waving monarchist who thinks that, frankly, £500 million a year is a bargain, right through to the Sue Townsend Tribute Act, who would transplant them all to a council estate in Leicester by tea time tomorrow. And I want to know why. Because actually, let's do what we always do and overthink things a little bit as well. The reason why this doesn't work as a phone-in, although it will do today, obviously, because you're going to ring in and tell me your answers to the question I've just asked you and the one I'm about to ask you. There's a psychological obstacle here. There's a psychological blockage, isn't there, to the idea that we just don't need it. I like Graham Smith. I think he's a great communicator, and I think he's got an ever-increasing grasp of how the media works. I hope that doesn't sound patronising. As I say, I thought he was shoddily treated on the day of the coronation. But his problem is a psychological obstacle, and I suffer from this. It's not quite an eye roll. It's a bit like heckling at the Labour Party conference yesterday. That young lad had some brilliant points to make. The fact that the Labour Party hasn't really gone as far as an awful lot of people would like in the cessation of selling arms to Netanyahu's regime, which, as we'll talk about towards the end of the next hour, has now turned its attention to Lebanon as well as Gaza. I think you probably don't know that among the 490 dead in Lebanon in the last couple of days, there are 35 children. 35 children dead. Anywhere else in the world that was going on, except the Middle East, and it would be garnering rather a lot more of attention. But there it is, 35 children dead in Lebanon. So you look at the royal family, and you have a psychological obstacle to imagining what life would be like without you. You're not so sorry. I was talking about eye rolling, and the heckler at the Labour Party makes some excellent points, but because he's a heckler, I kind of roll my eyes. I kind of, here we go. It's militant. It's student Grant. It's a Viz character wearing a Hessian body warmer and a hat knitted from his own armpit hair. And listen, it's lazy. It's boring. It's unfair. It's unkind. But I'm afraid I suffer from that. Happily, I also now benefit from the ability to recognise my own psychological obstacles. But I've got one here as well. Is it the simple scale of things? Is it just that the idea of not having it is too big to contemplate? This is why The Queen and I is such a brilliant book, because it doesn't faff about. It just goes straight in and says, no, that's it, it's over. I think a new government gets in, they've campaigned on a manifesto to abolish the royal family, and they just abolish it. And yet for the rest of us, it's an almost inconceivable, it's certainly an insurmountable obstacle, isn't it? Why? So there are two questions here. What should the royal family look like? Given that, as a country we're skint, and according to this report, they're currently costing us £500 million every single year. 0345 6060973. And number two, just talk to me about the psychological obstacle that the monarchy represents. About why you feel, or indeed if you don't feel, why you think I feel, this weird resistance to the suggestion that it is optional. The royal family is optional. Hit the numbers now. You will get through, okay? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Got your knickers in a right old twist about winter fuel payments. There's an old age pensioner over there who heads up an institution hoovering up £500 million worth of public money every single year. And what do you do when you see him? You doff your cap, tug your forelock and go down on one knee. I've done it again. I can only apologise. I thought of a better question during the break than I asked you before. What do we get for £500 million? What do we actually get? This is research from the pressure group Republic saying that the real cost of the royal family to taxpayers is £510 million a year. There'll be some room for manoeuvre in the margins here, but the central thrust of the findings is solid. That's nearly 6 times more than the £86 million of state funding from the annual sovereign grant. This is anti-monarchy campaigners who put this together. What do we get? Well, and if you're from outside the United Kingdom, that's another interesting. What do we get for £500 million? Is it good value for money? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. So I've asked you 3 questions. The first is, what would you do? What should it look like? The second is, what this obstacle to abolition, what's that actually about? And the third, and I think arguably the most interesting question is, what do we get for our money? 0345 6060 973. Tiago is in Bristol. Tiago, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. I was born in '88, and growing up, through the rise of Diana's popularity and influence in the world, she was a very, esteemed person in Brazilian culture. Her death was sorely felt.
Yes.
And partly of the reason why I wanted to move to the UK, there was a lot of this cool Britannia idea, the soft power, and the idea that, it is a better place, in a place where kings and monarchs still exist.
Yeah, I mean, you've jumped a little already. I don't know how big a fan of the royal family in its current form Diana was when she tragically left us. I mean, many people hold her up as an example of some of the worst excesses of the royal family. But she was a princess. So to someone growing up in Brazil, it had a touch of the Disney to it. It had a touch of the fairy tale.
Absolutely. That's exactly that. It's the fairy tale, and of course we don't get we get the news distilled to what appease us anyhow. And of course, moving to the UK at age 18, it was a rude awakening. And I don't know. I find that British mentality is still very much subservient to the idea of the monarchy. And I think part of our social problems and the fact that we still have this two-party system is a lot to do with that. I think there is a sense of that the moment that someone with a posh voice is talking, that they deserve more attention and more credit. And I feel that that's rooted on this idea that the monarchy is somehow special and somehow hold a greater deal of know-how, perhaps, of what's best for this country.
What's the score in Brazil? I mean, I know you have a president. Did you ever have a royal family in Brazil?
Well, we did, but
part of the Portuguese Empire, I suppose.
Absolutely. So the Portuguese Empire. We reached independence. We're pushing my primary school learning here, but we never had our own monarchy. Of course, we had the Portuguese, and kind of around about Napoleonic War time, kind of got dissolved, and our first president was a prince. So he declared independence and became the first president. So it's a bit shady that how our republic was born, but they realized that establishing a republic was the best way to not be pushed away.
Can I call you? Is it fair? As someone who didn't grow up here, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
How do you explain this, what I've called this psychological obstacle, that apart from this rather brilliant book by a writer called Sue Townsend that imagines...
I want to check it out, yeah.
Oh, it's really funny. I promise it'll make you laugh out loud. And she transplants the entire royal family to a council estate in Leicester overnight, pretty much. But part of the reason why that is so impactful is because it's so extraordinary and so unthinkable and so outlandish. And yet shouldn't be, really. £500 million a year. We spend all our lives at the moment talking about how we're going to save public money. Where do you, as someone who didn't grow up here, what do you see that psychological obstacle representing?
I think it's been so deeply inbuilt into the educational system and the way popular culture in the UK that is it's almost indivisible from British identity at this point. But I don't think it's impossible. I think that if we were actually allowed to have a sober analysis of cost-benefit, people would finally wake up to it. I feel that given that most people had the late Queen as some sort of maternal figure, and King Charles doesn't quite necessarily fit that gap.
I think he's done really well, but that's not the point, is it? No, exactly. We're talking about institutions here. Thank you. I mean, yes, so you get the Disney-fied view from abroad, and then you move here because you haven't been, inculcated with the rose-tinted spectacles since the cradle. You see the reality perhaps in slightly starker fashion. 25 minutes after 11 is the time. So this is proving my point. Tiago is an exception to the rule. This is, by some distance, the slowest response on the switchboard that we've had in about 4 months. I can't remember the last time that we weren't full up by 20 past the hour. Can you, Keith? When's the last time we didn't have every single line into the building full up by 20 past the hour? You'd have to go back months. Go back ages. It's so odd to me, this. And I'm authentic. Sometimes if I don't succeed in making you tell me what you think about something, it's because you can tell my heart's not really in it. And there's nothing else in the news. So Eleanor and I have kind of come up with an idea that we don't really have an enormous amount of faith in. And unless I have a double espresso before I start my introduction, you can tell. But on this, I really bloody mean it. Is that why are we spending £500 million on this family? And why do I feel slightly dirty even asking that question? Why do I feel a little bit wrong even asking that question? And I can't yet. One day I will. I can't do a phone-in about why this isn't working as a phone-in. Because it will do. That's the way it works. But it's not. We still had 10 people waiting to talk to us about the winter fuel allowance at 11 o'clock. We still had every hour yesterday. We got to the end of it, and the switchboard was still full of people who weren't able to contribute to the conversation that we were having. One of the single most significant elements of our shared existence, of our country and our history, is under dissection and standing accused of hoovering £500 million worth of our money unnecessarily on an annual basis at a time of epic financial problems, fiscal problems, and you don't care. Enough. 0345 6060 973. See, I've got to go to Texas now. That's where Joe is. Joe, what would you like to say?
Hi, yeah. I think it's interesting the point that was made earlier about the cost of the royal family. And I think people often look at the cost, but they don't look at the wider benefits, kind of perhaps somewhat are intangible, of having the royal family as ambassadors. And I think that can go into a huge amount, such as trade and investment, our ability to do MOUs and free trade agreements around the world. So I live in Texas. I've recently been involved in the UK and Texas signing a trade MOU together.
Yeah, we need to be absolutely clear before we get a touch of the Badenochs. A memorandum of understanding is not a trade agreement.
No, that's absolutely true.
It's essentially just a handshake that has absolutely no economic value whatsoever.
No, it's always, I mean, like many of these
things. And what
things,
role did the royal family play in that? Because I'm pretty sure Kemi Badenoch claimed it was 110% her.
Well, I mean, she was the one in London hosting Governor Abbot, so that is certainly true. But I do think there is this effect from the royal family.
I don't want to monster you, Joe, but you can't. I don't know how often you listen to the show. You can't come on and say things that you can't back up. What role? So your justification for the £500 million we spend on the royal family so far is an utterly meaningless memorandum of understanding trumpeted to the rafters by Kemi Badenoch, despite being built on Liz Truss-shaped sand. And you also claim that the royal family played an intrinsic role in delivering it. So,
well, look,
what a load of old cobblers!
Look, many countries employ diplomats around the world,
including us. We've got loads of diplomats. We've got diplomats coming out of our ears. Got more Ferrero Rocher than you can shake a stick at.
There is still, I will make this point, there is still a charm the royal family has over everyone, from the President of the United States of America. You mentioned Trump. You know, there's many people. Well, you know, there are many people that he might slate, but you know, the one person he didn't was the Queen. And I think there is something to be said about the fact that a royal family can transcend 7 or 8.
Yeah, but at which point? At what point? So we'll put that on one side of the scale, right? And we're putting £500 million of taxpayers' money on the other side of the scale. What does the scale look like? Because it doesn't look balanced to me.
It's difficult to, I mean, this is the thing. It'd be interesting to see the other measurements of, for example, changes and policies that have been influenced, because the royal family have had a sort of quasi-diplomatic effect on it. And I do think there's probably like a...
Yeah, but again, you could get that for £100 million a year. You could get that for 10 million. You could get that for 10 million quid a year. And actually, reading, I forget what I was reading recently, but when Johnson was minded to dissolve Parliament entirely and call a general election as a way of avoiding the rebellion from his own members, I read somewhere, maybe in Graham Brady's book, that it was made known that Her late Majesty the Queen considered that to be poor form, or that the palace considered that to be poor form. So Joe has a point there, even if his memorandum of understanding fell apart quicker than a Liz Truss premiership. But the idea that that's worth £500 million a year when we're receiving our instructions from on high to get very cross about pensioners' winter fuel allowances is just crackpot country territory once again, isn't it? Phone lines are full now. It's almost like I know what I'm doing. Here's Thomas Watts with the headlines. It is 11:34 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where £500 million for the royal family, according to calculations by, obviously, the heavily partisan Republic campaign group. But it's certainly, however you cut it, a heck of a lot more than the £86 million that is presented as the sort of total state funding from the annual sovereign grant, not least because it doesn't include security. We don't know how much security costs, but they estimate £150 million. Income from royal residences, commercial revenue that you could get from royal residences would hit £96 million, they reckon. Duchies of Lancaster and Cornwall worth about £99 million a year. And as Graham Smith, the chief executive of the Republic, says, how can we talk about cutting the winter fuel allowance while wasting £500 million on the royals? Now, of course, it's taxpayers' money, and he is only one taxpayer, and an awful lot of taxpayers would probably argue that it's not a waste. But what if it is? And the best way to work out whether it is for me to ask you, what do we get for £500 million, and does that sound like value for money? It's 25 to 12. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, but what do we get for £500 million a year that we couldn't get for a tenth of that sum, for example? Kay's in Redbridge. Kay, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Kay.
I feel like I'm always calling you when it comes to monarchy, but really, I'm so glad that you're having this conversation because nobody else seems to. It's like you dare not touch anything to do with the abolition of monarchy. When you say kind of they're in our psychological, our kind of...
Yes, obstacle.
Our psyches.
Yes.
Yes. They are the obstacle, as in how do we get rid of them? Because you're not allowed to bring them up in Parliament. None of the political groups have it as part of their, what they're being elected on. Republic isn't a political party, otherwise I'd vote for them in a heartbeat. Exactly how do we get rid of them? So to me, it's not that they're in my psyche. I have no time for them at all. I think they're the biggest welfare sponges of them all. And I think they do absolutely nothing for us except perpetuate inequality. And this deference, the whole thing is a load of nonsense. But as I said, what I would like to see is a clear path of how we get rid of them so that I can start walking along that path along with lots of other people who've had enough of them.
What would it look like in manifesto terms, do you think? I mean, let's imagine that we had a party, you and I, the Kay and James party, and we wanted to sell it. So the first thing you need to do is to get over that psychological obstacle. Have you ever wondered what we could do with £500 million a year? And then I think for people who feel compassion towards the royal family, which we shouldn't be dismissive of, or certainly not contemptuous of, then we'd need to describe the circumstances in which they would live afterwards, in which they would live subsequently, possibly leave the door open to some sort of ceremonial role that doesn't cost us £500 million a year. What I mean is baby steps, perhaps, is the way over the obstacle rather than a bulldozer.
I think to start with, we need to talk about the truth. And the truth is that the family that people are so falling over or falling in love with because, they're photographed from birth or because, William is the son of Diana, etc., etc.
So is Harry, though.
The same as the monarchy.
So is Harry, and he doesn't get a very easy ride, does he?
He's self-reliant. He's a different ball game entirely, in the same way that Diana was. But no, the people in kind of grey suits, that 500 billion, that £500 million, the 500 million, is not all going to that family. There are people making a lot of money out of them being there. And that family, it's like the wagging of the dog, isn't it? While we're looking at them, what are we not looking at? Who are we not looking at? Where is that money going to? And it comes to establishment and the class system that, is so entrenched in this country.
Yeah, it's like religion almost. It feels like blasphemy, what we're saying, what you're saying. I'm not involved.
Yeah,
I'm just asking questions.
Absolutely.
It is blasphemy. How dare you say? Some people will be furious, but they won't really know why. Do you know the weirdest call? Well, not the weirdest. There's too much competition. But one of the most poignant calls I've taken ever was after the Duke of Edinburgh passed away. And I can't remember the exact context or the exact question I was asking, but another naval veteran rang in, someone else who'd served in the Navy, to I think to quite a high level. But that doesn't matter, actually, does it? The risk that you expose yourself to has nothing to do with your rank. And I asked him, because I was a little bit surprised by the direction in which the conversation had gone. And I said, do you think he was fundamentally a better or a more important person than you? A better person, not a more important person, because importance is bestowed upon us. Do you think he was a better person, a more valuable person, a more valuable human being than you? And this chap, without pausing for breath, just said, yes, of course. And it really, I won't say it broke my heart, but it did sort of take my breath away, that is baked into our society from the top down. Like this hierarchy of value, this hierarchy of human value. And that's what you're alluding to, or that's what you're describing. How can you possibly teach your children that the sky is the limit when somebody else's children are born princesses and princes? I don't know. But what do we get for £500 million? 0345 6060 973. Thank you, Kay. James is in Derby. James, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. First time caller, so be gentle.
Always.
I absolutely agree. This is a fundamental waste of public money. And you always get the rhetoric that, they bring in tourism, the money comes back in different ways. But actually, if you look at it from the outset, the tourism will be there. The infrastructure of the royal family, the history is there. So why are we wasting this amount of money on a family that?
Well, answer the question. Why are we?
Because it's ingrained in us. We're brainwashed from years and years of this. You can't. There's three things you can't talk about or disagree with in the pub, and that's religion, royalty, and dogs. And it's like actually,
I thought it was politics.
So. Well, no, dogs.
Different rules in Derby. These are Derby rules. Religion, royalty, and dogs.
I steer well away from politics in the pub. But the royal family, it's inbred in us, and you can't have a conversation. You see the news, the mainstream media, who will never say a bad word against the top end of the royal family, and it just becomes that whole piece of, well, they bring in lots of money from different areas, but do they really?
I kind of don't want to tell you what my gotcha is when people make that point, in case someone rings in and makes it in the next 10 minutes. I'd much rather spring it on them. So I'll give you the watered down version. Is that the National Trust does all right, and most of those houses belong to the National Trust now. They don't continue to belong to the families that. I guess sometimes they live in the attic, don't they? Or they live in a wing of the house. But the upkeep has been handed over to the National Trust because they can't afford, in the absence of sugar plantations and slavery in the East India Company, they can't afford to live in the style to which their ancestors were accustomed. And yet people keep visiting them. People still visit them. They still want to see the plundered art and the amazing architecture and the beautiful gardens. They don't need to see the Earl or the Duke or whatever he is riding around on his lawnmower.
You're absolutely right, and we don't need to have the hundreds of family members that cream off the top, and the history is there. We've got.
I think so, and yet I feel dirty. I'm not as far into this as you are. I don't feel it as deeply as you do. Logically, I do, but it's the second phone-in of the day, really, where the tension between feeling and fact is very real. You can't ignore emotions. Most of the biggest decisions we make in our lives are based on emotions, not facts, like love or hate. That's nothing to do with facts, But the biggest decisions of our life will be based upon love. Things that, whether it's the person with whom you decide to have children, or the person with whom you want to settle down, or the person that you are going to dedicate the rest of your life to defying and attacking, whatever it might be. These are emotional responses. Well, actually, I guess sometimes the hate can be factual rather than emotional if you perceive the problems that people pose. Speaking of hate, Yvette Cooper has blamed the Tories for the Southport riots, which Henry Riley, in attendance for the speech in Liverpool, will tell us a little bit more about shortly. But why have I got an emotional blockage on the royal? I mean, I can contemplate it intellectually. What do we get for £500 million? Answer: came there? None. It is 11:47. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. All the top talent from LBC is in Liverpool for the Labour Party conference, of course. I'm James O'Brien, live from Leicester Square. Here is Henry Riley with news of the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper's speech a little earlier today.
Well, good afternoon, or good morning, I should say, James. I thought you were expecting Lewis Goodall or someone there with an introduction like that. I've been in plenty of speeches, this particular conference and fringe events, but this one, I have to say, got the best reception that I've seen so far. The theme of it was that the streets belong to us, and she broke that down in a number of ways, the Home Secretary. Understandably, and most newsworthy, was her focus on the riots that followed the tragedy that we saw in Southport, and very clear, strong language from the Home Secretary that people need to stop making excuses for what happened.
Don't anyone tell me that was protest. Don't anyone tell me that was about immigration or policing or poverty. Plenty of people have strong views on immigration, on crime, on the NHS and more, but they don't pick up bricks and throw them at the police. They don't set light to buildings with people inside. It was arson. It was racism. It was thuggery. It was crime.
And I think that's the strongest we've heard from a senior Labour politician, of course, very forthright after it happened, but Yvette Cooper very much making the point that it was racism, plain and simple. Now, what was the reason for what we saw in Southport? Well, and after Southport, I should say, in other areas of the UK, well, one reason Yvette Cooper was saying, the Home Secretary, was that it happened as a result of some of the policies, how the state of public services were left by the Conservatives.
It happened because criminals thought they would get away with it. They saw the cracks in the system, the impunity that built up through the Tory years. And when they decided to run riot those early August days, they thought no one would stop them. They were wrong. With Keir Starmer's leadership, this Labour government made clear that we would back our police, not blame them. We would stand up for our courts, not undermine them. We would pull our communities together, not divide them. We stood up for the rule of law. Decent people stood up for their communities, and together we put the disorder down.
And as you would expect at a party conference, James very much took aim at the Conservatives in other ways. She described the Tories and their mates in reform as right-wing wreckers, ruining public support for the police. She said that previously it was a sackable offence for a Tory Home Secretary to go after the police. And now, she said, it seems to be an article of faith in the Conservative leadership election, with the candidates standing. Straight after the speech, I caught up with the policing minister, Dame Diana Johnson.
I thought it was the speech about rebuilding our communities, reclaiming our streets, and we are a party of law and order. We're on the side of decent people, and, you know, she referred to the riots that happened in August and the response that the Labour government had to that disorder on our streets. We're not tolerating that level of criminal disorder. It was a speech about hope, really, and we're a country of decent people.
And you had all of the Home Office ministers there nodding along, James. I was sitting a few rows back from Pat McFadden, who's very much a sort of architect, one of the architects of Labour's general election win, and I saw him making notes and nodding and standing up and applauding. It went down very well. And then lastly, in terms of the sort of specific policies, James, because a lot of it is about rhetoric and it's about galvanising the party. Also, and this got the biggest cheer, a specific offence for those who assault shop workers. This is something USDOR, the trade union, and the co-op have been calling for some time, making that a specific offence, halving knife crime, I should say, within a decade, one of the key policies as well, and ending what's known as the £200 limit, which essentially is to do with shoplifting, James. If you steal items that are less than the value of £200, currently the police don't go after you. Yvette Cooper saying, we're getting rid of that, and if you do shoplift, make no mistake, the police will go after you.
You were quite impressed by this. I don't want to invite you into the realms of subjectivity, but you felt that the hall was quite taken with this speech by Yvette Cooper.
Yes, definitely, and this is the issues that Yvette Cooper covers. Look, violence against women and girls was something I didn't even mention, and that got a rapturous reception. But it's those key issues that really do matter to Labour members. It's such an emotional issue what happened with regards to the rioting that we saw up and down the country, and I think it's something that really resonated with a lot of Labour members in the audience. And at that particular speech, it was full, which it's not always full, the main hall, I have to say. It will be full later for Keir Starmer's speech, but for Yvette Cooper's speech it was full. I think particularly as a politician as well, Yvette Cooper's well known to a lot of people. She ran unsuccessfully to be the Labour Party leader some years back. We know that she's been Work and Pension Secretary under Gordon Brown. She's held these high offices, and this really was a test for her. Her first conference as a very senior, one of the great officers of state, and based on what I was hearing from members, she certainly didn't disappoint.
Just remind us what time Keir Starmer will be on his feet and what, if anything, we know about what he is likely to say.
Yes, he'll be on his feet at 2 o'clock. I suspect it will start about 2:05, because normally you've got a sort of 5 minutes solid of applause where Labour members will cheer him to the rafters, and there will be 100 MPs in attendance. As you can imagine, they can't fit all of their MPs in, because otherwise there'd be no space for many of the members who've been coming to conference for years, many of the activists, the trade union officials. And look, we'll have to see what Keir Starmer says, but certainly in terms of what's been briefed out so far and what we know some of the key themes are, it's going to be slightly more optimistic than I think we've heard in recent weeks, because I mean, Keir Starmer gave that speech a few weeks ago in Downing Street where he was accused of it being very doom and gloom, and he was identifying the problem and perhaps not pointing towards any sunny upland. That was the point that was levied against Rachel Reeves as well, the Chancellor, when she spoke yesterday. Well, Keir Starmer's going to talk about a prize. He's going to speak about that specifically being the reward, if you like, from enduring some of these tough decisions to be made. He's not going to put an exact time scale on it, but from what I'm hearing, it's a 10-year plan that he's very keen to emphasise. So we get some of these difficult decisions out early, and then we'll start to see things change in Britain. And then, I mean, aside from that, there are other policies that Sir Keir is expected to speak about. The Hillsborough law, which has been spoken about, it's on the front page of the Liverpool Echo today, and in the Daily Mirror as well, this idea of people who suffer appalling tragedies, often state failures like Grenfell as well, really honing in on that and referencing back to his time as Director of Public Prosecutions and some of the injustices. And then, I mean, things like benefit fraud has been briefed out as well on the front page of some of the newspapers. But I think this will really be a moment for him, James, to enjoy the moment. It's the first time Labour have had a Prime Minister speak at their conference for 15 years. Obviously, he needs to point to those better times ahead, but also it's a moment to recognise the astonishing result they achieved just a few months ago.
Henry Riley, great stuff. I'd enjoy the rest of your time in Liverpool. 11:55 is the time. I was struck by that, the power there of Yvette Cooper's condemnations of those riots and statement of the racism and the arson and the horrors and the violence in no uncertain terms, and then immediately struck by how surprised I was to hear it. Why am I surprised to hear it? It's extraordinary, isn't it, that stating the bleeding obvious when it comes to the Farage riots is somehow refreshing or is somehow revelatory. It just speaks to how mealy-mouthed many of the right-wing mouthpieces have been in the aftermath. And of course, the Home Secretary she was referring to was Suella Braverman, who chose Armistice Day to attack the police. Extraordinary, really. Anyway, back to the £500 million that we spend reportedly on the royal family and the vexed question of what we get in return, particularly, of course, at a time when the country is not very well off. There are plenty of very well-off people here, not least the King and his family. But for the country as a whole, the concentration of wealth at the very top gets worse. And measures like child poverty, I saw a terrible graph this morning of the change in child poverty over the last 10 years or so. Poland has performed the best in Europe, and guess which country has performed the worst? Yeah, broken Britain. Angie is in Ealing. Angie, what would you like to say?
Hello.
Hello.
The last time we spoke, actually, it was about Cruella talking about immigrants and whipping things up. So
well, I think we all got that wrong. We all got that wrong. She turned out to be lovely, didn't she?
Yes, bless her. I think, well, number one, not all of us feel squeamish about the idea of not having a royal family. So in a therapy sort of way, I think you need to go away and think about what your reason for feeling emotional about it is.
Yes, it's this job, probably.
Because the rest of us sort of had enough. And at a time when we're running the ruler over spending,
yes,
and
exactly.
we're interested in efficiency and, sweating the assets, as you'd say, in a sort of financial way, this one doesn't add up.
Do you know what you've just made me realise is the difference in polling between saying, do you want a royal family, and saying, do you think the royal family is worth £500 million a year, may get rather different results, actually.
Well, and also I think, reading some of the Republic polls that they've done, younger people are much less, it's sort of the Brexit, demographic again, right?
Well, no,
younger people aren't
86%.
particularly in favour, are they?
86% think that it was important for Britain to have a monarchy. And the numbers the numbers have come. That was in 1983. Now it's 54%. So yeah, I mean it's coming down, but it's still a majority. Very or quite important to have a monarchy. But how many of them would say it's worth £500 million a year, Angie? That's the key question, isn't it?
Well, not many. And I mean, what work? So the business. I own a small business, right? I'd say, how much work are they doing for that money, right? Because I don't think anyone's working 35-hour week. The rest of us out here are working a hell lot longer than 35 hours as well.
That's what they define by work, doesn't it? I mean, but you're absolutely right. It is. I mean, it just speaks to injustice on every imaginable level. It really does.
Can I tell you a story?
Yeah, go on.
So.
Well, I haven't got long, actually. Do you want to apologise to Andy in Tunbridge Wells? Because he probably won't have time to contribute. And he's probably quite... Are you disgusted by that, Andy, in Tunbridge Wells?
Absolutely.
Sorry,
yeah, thank you. Sorry from disgusted in Tunbridge Wells. Carry on, Angie.
So my dad got an MBE this year. Yeah, well, you say woo, right? But we're a Brown family. And so I sort of felt that, the whole British Empire thing was a bit orcs, right? So we go there, and but he's very proud, and we're proud of him and what he's done in the community. So we all trot along there to the palace, and that was lovely. And then I got talking to, because I sort of talk to everybody, I just got talking to the chap that was behind my dad in the queue. And he was a really nice guy called Phil, and he owned a bakery and food cooperative in Bristol.
Okay.
And we're in this sort of ante-room full of beautiful things, and it's next to, I think, the portrait room or the picture room.
I normally hurry people at this point, but you've got a gift for storytelling. I am going to be late for the news, but take your time.
Thank you. And so the picture room or the thingy room, right, the lady tells you about it. It's got the biggest number of Rubens in a private collection. There's a Canaletto.
Yeah.
There's
a can of what?
And the other. Yeah, exactly. And standing next to me is Phil, who has dedicated his life to feeding people in Bristol who can't afford food.
Yeah.
And you know what? I'm sorry.
It's Roman.
It made me feel sick.
Yeah, we watch the kind of I Claudius on the telly or Gladiator, and we think, oh God, flipping heck, things are so different. They're not different at all. They've just sanitised it. You could flog one of those paintings and probably pay every winter fuel payment, or flog 10 of them, and there wouldn't be a poor pensioner in the country. I don't know whether that is overly simplistic. I don't think it is in this context, because it speaks to public ownership. It speaks to taxpayers.
It's our money. It's our money. We own those paintings, right?
Are you sure? Are you sure? I mean, I don't know. Some of them might have been gifts, or they might have been looted. Right. They might have been looted from Louis XIV's palace. I do know what you mean. And I've often wondered why we can't have a borrow. That would be great PR for the royal family. If Angie and Ealing, with security notwithstanding, was allowed to have the Canaletto over Christmas, stick it above the fireplace, bring the neighbours round to have a butcher's. That's public ownership, isn't it? Thank you, Angie. Lovely stuff. 12:01 is the time. It's 4 minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we turn in an entirely different direction now. We'll catch up with those attacks on Lebanon. The language of news is fascinating, isn't it? Attacks on Hezbollah, or attacks on Lebanon. Attacks on Hamas or attacks on Gaza. I suppose one way would be to count how many people have been killed who are not in Hezbollah or Hamas, and then work out whether it's accurate to describe them as attacks upon Hezbollah. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud and looking at what other headlines say. So it's an interesting one, isn't it? Attacks on Israel, attacks on Lebanon, attacks on Gaza, attacks on Hezbollah, attacks on Hamas. And technically they're all happening, but the language that you use in a headline is so important in conveying a sense of what is happening, which may be slightly at odds with the reality of what is happening. So CBS, Israel strikes Lebanon in latest series of attacks, aimed at, I imagine, if I click on that headline, aimed at Hezbollah. That's probably the best way of doing it. Israel attacks Lebanon. Israel strikes Lebanon in latest series of attacks aimed at Hezbollah. A figure I've got from a former Channel 4 News staffer is 35 dead children among the 490 dead in Lebanon. So Israel attacks Hezbollah and kills 35 children. Make of that what you will. But we'll catch up on a little more of the detail of this benighted conflict at 12:45 today. Before that, something completely different. I love Moira Stewart. I don't know if Moira Stewart knows that I love Moira Stewart because she's such a sort of dignified presence in the building. She's a presenter on our sister station, Classic FM, and also quite an intimidating presence. I think that generation of newsreaders had a touch of the headmasters and headmistresses about them. You just turn to them like for positions of trust and authority, I would describe it as. And Miss Stewart is such a figure, for me at least, and for many people, I presume, of my age, of trust and authority, that I come over a little bit kindergarten whenever I bump into her in the corridor. She has never been anything other than charm personified towards me. Perfectly plausible she's got no idea who I am. And given how I dress most of the time, she could be forgiven for thinking that I've wandered in off the streets in the hope of nicking a stray laptop or something like that. But she is a broadcaster of such aplomb that I tell you now, she's one of the people I see in the building and can't quite believe I get to work in the same space. I saw Jonathan Ross yesterday. He is also a broadcaster for whom I have such epic regard. I can't quite. He does a podcast with his daughter, and he was coming into the studio as I was leaving with William Dalrymple, and I just, wow, can't believe it. And Moira's given an interview, quite a rare interview, actually, in which she describes being very nearly scammed. And I think this is a very powerful intervention, and I think that she has elected to make it because of that authority and trust that we talked about, or that I talked about just 2 short minutes ago. If a figure of such authority and I think wisdom can be very, very nearly sucked into a scammer's web, then it's another piece of evidence that the rest of us need to talk about this stuff in a slightly less patronizing fashion. You know? So that idea that you're only going to get caught if you are a bit gullible or you're not paying attention. You know, Moira Stewart is clearly none of those things. I'll tell you a little bit more detail about what happened to her shortly. But that is the phone-in invitation until 12:45 today. And I want to be clear. You cannot believe that this happened to you or to your sharp as a tack sister or dad. Do you see what I mean? It's a slightly self-selecting sample, isn't it? I don't imagine many people sit there thinking, yeah, I'm a right old gullible fool. I'm not surprised I got caught. No, his gullibility is probably one of those things that none of us think that we suffer from, whereas in fact some of us must suffer from it, otherwise it wouldn't be a thing that people suffered from. So give me a ring and tell me how gullible you are. I don't know. That's the point that is so powerful about this story, is that it's the plausibility of it. I've had a couple on my phone. I'm normally really good at this. I've had because my oldest has gone away, and I have sent her a kind of package that stuff she'd forgotten. So I've sent her a package, and I got a little text telling me something had gone wrong with my package. And I was about to click on it. I don't know whether I get into trouble as soon as I click on it, but I was about to click on it when I noticed that it wasn't quite the right email address. So the link had too many .cos on it, and it wouldn't have been the courier company that I use. And then, of course, I realised immediately that wasn't actually the courier company that I use. But if you send out 1 million of those messages, the odds that you've got a doting dad who's worried that his daughter's favourite trainers haven't arrived in the university halls of residence, you just might look at it. And then, and another one. Is this a scam? When I was looking to track the same parcel, I told you I was a doting dad. I was looking to track the same parcel. I clicked on the first thing that came up on Google, entered the tracking number, and they said £1 to find out where it is. And I thought, that can't be right. So then I looked at what I clicked on, and it wasn't the site of the courier company. It wasn't I used the Royal Mail. It wasn't the Royal Mail that did it. It was I don't think there's even a scam there. I think it's a bit suspect, but I don't know that any laws are being broken. And they came up as the top search result on Google. So you clicked on it. It looked like I was going to be tracking a Royal Mail parcel. So I clicked all the way through, entered the reference. It came up. We found your parcel. Click here to pay £1 to find out where it is. And I thought, well, there's no way they're charging me £1 to find out where my own parcel. I won't tell you how much it cost to send it, honestly. But there's no way I'm charged. So I thought something's happened. So then I went back and noticed that the actual Royal Mail tracking service was the third search result down on a search for Royal Mail parcel tracking services. So I could have fallen for that one. The one that I really nearly fell for, and I mean really, I think I've told you this already. Moira's story is much more interesting than mine, by the way. Was for clothes on Facebook. I'm going through a curious phase. It's not over yet, I'm very embarrassed to admit, where I'm buying quite a lot of clothes on Facebook. So my algorithms are working so well that they send me pictures of things that I think look really nice, and I think, oh, I'll have that. And I don't know, are you familiar with the company Hackett, like the gentleman's outfitter Hackett? It's quite high end. It's not a cheap one. I've got a lovely coat from Hackett, but I'm generally more of a TK Maxx man. But this Hackett website opened, and it said it was like a warehouse sale or an end of season sale, and I clicked on it, and it was completely kosher. It looked exactly like the normal Hackett website. Do you know why it looked exactly like the normal Hackett website? Because it was. They'd completely ripped it off, and all they'd changed were the prices to make them an almost unbelievable fraction of what you would normally pay, and then the payment method. So I spent half an hour shopping. I was buying. I mean, it was a huge discounts. It was cheaper than TK Maxx prices for Hackett Clobber. And then I get to the end, and I'm clicking on it, and it was PayPal. And I thought, there's no way that the only option that a company like Hackett is going to offer for payment is PayPal. There will be other options as well. I've done quite a lot of online shopping, and then when you looked at the PayPal link, it had a bloke's name on it. So someone had gone to enormous amounts of trouble actually I say that, I don't know how much trouble it would involve to set up that whole website. And how many people would you need to successfully scam in order to make it worth your while? I was about to spend £600 or £700 on there for about £5,000 worth of gear. So I don't really subscribe to the idea that you need to be a bit slow on the uptake to fall for this stuff. But Moira's story is extraordinary. Moira Stewart's story is extraordinary. So imagine it's 9 o'clock in the morning and your phone rings and it's your bank. Moira says, I'm ex-directory, so I didn't question it. First mistake, but first point at which the rest of us go, yeah, fair enough, absolutely. She was told that someone had removed money from her account in collusion with staff at her local branch. That's clever. So immediately the person on the other end of the phone is your friend. They're not asking you for money. They're helping you recover money that someone else has stolen. And they've cited the possibility that an accomplice is working at your local bank, which immediately sets the scene for you not being able to trust the people that you would ordinarily want to trust. So she was told that she had to go to another branch, not her own branch, to resolve the problem. Now, your alarm bells might be ringing at this point, but I don't know that mine would. I don't know that my mum's would. I don't know that, well, a lot of people's would. And Moira said, I had absolutely no idea I was being scammed. The fraudster stayed on the phone the whole time and told me it was an inside job at my bank that they had uncovered. So he told me to stay on my mobile so he could tell me what to say to bank staff at the new branch. He said, we're going to send this amount of money from your account and see what happens if they intercept it. So you're going to help us catch the person in your branch who is nicking your money. Again, the alarm bells might have gone off at this point for some people, but not for everybody. And when it's someone as authoritative and as intelligent as Moira Stewart, you realise that it could happen to anybody. So she gets to the bank. She's still on the phone. She says, this gorgeous young man questioned what I was doing, and he said, can you wait a moment, please, madam? She got cross because she was waiting while other customers were being served. But then he took me to one side and said, this doesn't sound right. and now I cannot thank him enough. She was immediately put onto the bank's anti-fraud team, which confirmed that it was a scam. And I'm interested in how it made you feel as well as in what happened to you, because that's what's so powerful about this interview. Maurice Stewart says, I was absolutely devastated. I was embarrassed and angry with myself. If you're very independent, as I am, it feels like you have let yourself down. Your family, everyone who knows you. This feeling, this intrusion, it doesn't leave you. And she said she was telling her story because she wanted to make sure that no one else feels like this. That is public service journalism at its purest, isn't it? At its finest. There is so much shame and embarrassment attached to this sort of thing, but it's important that it's talked about so people are aware. And that's what we're going to help do now, is excise some of this shame and embarrassment. Because if it can happen to Maurice Stewart, and I'm sure she won't mind me saying this, it could happen to you. It could happen to me. It could happen to any of us. So what did happen? How nearly was your story? Or indeed, did the scammers succeed? A slightly odd cultural leap now from Moira Stewart to Jason Statham. I can't imagine there are many contexts in which someone has hopped so effortlessly from one cultural figure to the other. But Jason Statham's latest movie, The Beekeeper, which is absolutely, let me just check something with Eleanor. Can I say banging? Can I say banging? I know I'm not allowed to say that something slaps, but can I say that something's banging? Am I too old for banging? Yeah? Okay, so Jason Statham's new movie, The Beekeeper, is absolutely splendid. It's a truly splendid cinematic entertainment. And that has a plot pivot that involves somebody who would be widely considered to be a figure of authority and trust, falling for an incredibly sophisticated scam. And I like the mission that Moira Stewart has set herself. I like the idea that she is effectively, although she's too modest to put it in these terms herself, she's effectively saying that if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone, which is an opportune moment for us to say, what happened to you? 0345 6060 973. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the insulation you may feel you have from so-called scams is probably not as effective as you think it is. Because if Moira Stewart, who's shared details of coming perilously close to being ripped off by scammers, can fall for this sort of stuff, then I would cautiously suggest that absolutely anybody can. 21 minutes after 12 is the time. And the number you need remains 0345 6060 973. Don't forget to remind me to tell you about the play I saw last night, by the way. One of the best things I've seen on the London stage in a long, long time. I know it's expensive, but that you can avail yourself of various offers and opportunities or scrounge it. I don't know, but I must tell you, it's absolutely gorgeous. Matthew's in Swansea on this one. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Sorry, a bit nervous, first time caller.
It's only me. It's only me. We're not going to have a row about this, are we, Matthew? There's nothing to be nervous about.
So on the subject of being scammed, I'd like to think I'm quite sharp and not very trusting.
Yes.
I went on...
Not very gullible. It's nice to be trusting, isn't it? I said we weren't going to have a row. That lasted for 43 seconds. I do apologise. I'll shut up now.
My mother, elderly, widowed lady, wanted some logs for her fire. Run out of logs, in desperate need of logs, jumped on Facebook, searched for logs, found a company, paid £160 for 2 ton bags of logs.
Yeah.
They measured me back once I paid and said, can they have a replanting fee to go towards the Forestry Commission for the logs? And I thought, I've never done that before. I don't know what that is. So without that fee, we won't deliver the logs. I thought, well, this is weird. On looking into it, I got scammed £160 by a team in Nigeria.
So they came back for more. So you'd already been ripped off. I thought they'd jumped on the back of a bona fide transaction and tried to squeeze a few quid out of you as a kind of side order, but the whole thing was a scam.
The whole thing was a scam. I paid £160 to the legitimate website, had logs there, had reviews there. They had They asked the right questions to get my location. They said, "Oh yeah, they're based within a 50-mile radius of me." They seemed totally legitimate until they asked for the additional fees for replanting to go towards forage.
Because they thought in for a penny, in for a pound. They didn't care whether you busted them or not because they already had your 160 quid. How did you establish that it was in Nigeria? From your bank?
Yeah, exactly that. I got onto the bank straight away.
Looking back, what should you have spotted?
I guess I probably would have not gone on Facebook. Don't buy anything. I wouldn't go on Facebook, and I would look for what I could self-prove legitimate reviews within legitimate people posting reviews.
They must be on it as well all the time to delete people saying this is a scam, this is a scam, this is a scam.
Exactly that. And as soon as they get found out, they open up a new one because I continued searching.
Right.
And again, I came across another person.
Who'd have thought that logs? I mean, I suppose everything that's deliverable is doable, isn't it?
Exactly. I was in a desperate situation. We needed logs ASAP. I thought, let's just get this over and done with.
Sorry to laugh, but I mean, does your mum not have central heating? Does it all rely on logs?
Well, it doesn't all rely on logs.
No, I just giggled at the word desperate. I've never heard anyone say, I need logs, like someone out round the back of the bus station on a Friday night going, have you got a spare pair? I've got to get some logs. I'm desperate for logs. But I take your point. You needed to sort your mum out is what you needed to do.
Yeah, exactly that. And doing so, stitched myself up. But I've, learned never to buy anything off Facebook ever again.
That's my wardrobe, absolutely mullered. but I very, very nearly fell for it myself, and it was only the fact that it was PayPal. It's not just Moira Stewart, of course. Matthew Wright, also a sort of figure of trust and authority, and now a part of the weekend schedule here at LBC with you every Saturday and Sunday. He's spoken on air about how he felt after a £19,000 fraud. It's worth actually listening to him talking about that, and you can find a link at lbc.co.uk. And they were also pretending to work for his bank. I wonder if it was exactly the same scam that Moira Stewart very nearly fell for. Did you tell the police, Matthew, or did you think it wasn't worth it?
No, I didn't. I didn't bother. I should have. I spoke to the bank. In fairness, the bank got my money back within 24 hours.
Yes.
But as far as I think the bank were doing an internal investigation on it against the bank that this person was using. I would like to assume that the bank are going to report it for fraud.
I think there's quite a lot of just take care of what you've lost and don't really alert people to the widespread nature of this kind of thing. Matthew's story is more complicated than yours and arguably cleverer, I suppose, because the figures are so much higher. He fell for a delivery scam like the one I mentioned earlier, but paid £2.50. He's been in agony lately, Matthew, right? I know he's talked about this as well on his show, but he's kind of got all manner of pains in his neck and elsewhere, and that would make your guard fall, wouldn't it? That would make your guard considerably lower. So he paid that and then got a phone call saying, did you fall for a scam yesterday? And of course you think again, no, these people are on my side. And that's how they got him on the hook for thousands of pounds. God dear. Clem's in Harrogate. Clem, what would you like to say?
I feel stupid is the best way of describing it.
Oh, go on.
About 18 months ago, I had made a purchase in a local shop, and as I walked out of the store, my credit card company phoned up and verified the fact that had I just made this purchase, because I normally use the card for online purchases only.
Yes.
And it was genuine, fine, no problem, went away. A couple of months ago, I was sitting in the kitchen having breakfast, and
it's all about the colour detail, isn't it, Clem? Telling a story. It's all about the detail. Come on, what were you having? Shreddies?
No, it was actually Morrison's Savers porridge oats. As it happened.
Fantastic. Very reasonable.
Anyway, so the number flashed up on my phone. I phoned up and they said, "Is this Mr. Day?" Yes. Took me through the verification checks and said, "We've had it looks like you've got a fraudulent transaction on your credit card because I know you're based in Harrogate, and this is for an Argos store in Birmingham. Was it you?"
Yeah.
No. Okay. Well, I think what we've got to do then, we've got to take you through the fraud prevention thing, go through a blocking process and what have you. But we'll have to go through a validation process where we basically put a charge on your account, we check that it's all working, and then we refund it.
Yeah.
Okay. This is, I was slightly suspicious at this point, but I thought it's a genuine number. The number came up on the phone. They're phoning me. They know who I am. They've got my details. And they asked me then to log on to the website. I asked me to put a new PIN number in for my account, verified it all and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And at that point, I thought, you stupid...
Too late.
Too late. At that point, they got access to my credit card. And I feel so stupid because...
Oh, you shouldn't feel stupid. You shouldn't feel stupid. And many people... If Moira Stewart can fall for this stuff, Clem, then anybody can.
Well, yeah, I know, but I used to work in IT, and IT security was part of my remit. So I always say to my wife, never click on dumb links, never answer these phone calls and stuff like that. And I fell for it. But the only reason I fell for it was because it was a genuine number. It was a spoofed genuine number.
How did they do that then? Do we know?
I don't know how, but apparently talking then to my credit card company's security team, because they blocked the card, and I had to have a new card and everything else like that. Apparently it's quite possible for these hackers to spoof mobile phone numbers.
So it looks like you're getting a number from your original...
Exactly.
And you're not. That would make everyone relax, Clem, wouldn't it? Everyone would relax.
Exactly. And that's the only reason I fell for it, because it was still in my phone. I don't know how it was, but it was in my phone call history. It came up with credit provider name, and I'd obviously had the call from them, and I must have phoned them in the past as well.
Yeah.
But no, but what also confused me about it all was the fact that they had the credit card patter, if you like, down to a T.
Yeah.
They asked them all the right questions. I'm so and so. You can go. Here's my number. You can call me back if you need to. Me just going through your account details. Click at the keyboard.
Yeah.
Yes, I see you're at this address and you've been with us for so. But what also concerns me about that is, they had all my account details down to a T. How did they know? And the only other thing I can think of, and again, this is something the credit card security team wouldn't dismiss, was the fact that someone had siphoned up a load of details.
Sold your data.
Sold my data. And then, and so I'm now getting scammed that way. So, but I suppose the message from this is, if there is a takeaway, I'm now a lot more cautious.
Yes.
But the other thing you have to bear in mind is, if phone numbers can be spoofed, you just can't trust anyone calling.
Well, I don't think the bank ever rings you, really.
They don't.
And they maybe argue, Richard says they don't advertise this enough. You'll never get a phone call off your bank. And if you do, you've got nothing.
Now, but of course, 18 months.
No, I know. I'm not suggesting you should have realised that. I'm just sort of like you, joining forces to protect other people from similar experiences. And even there, so a couple of people fell for the same scam that Moira Stewart very, very nearly fell for, including Tom's sister-in-law, to the tune of £10,000. Exactly the same scam. And the bank, which was a major high street building society, told her it was just tough because she had transferred the money. She had gone into a bank and transferred her own money into a different account. But her daughter works in the industry and so was able to get it back for her. Clem, thank you. And Tom, thank you too. Amelia Cox is here now with your headlines. 12:35 is the time. So I saw Waiting for Godot last night, which is a remarkable play that is not really about anything, famously. But my goodness me, the production was absolutely extraordinary. I can't remember the last time. My old mate Sam, who I hired to review the school play when I was the editor of a magazine at school, he wrote in his review, I always think you can tell a lot about how good a play is by how many times you check your watch. And I don't know why that stuck in my... He's dead right, isn't he? I'm sure he wasn't the first to come up with that. But I always think of it when I'm sitting in the theatre and I think, I wonder how long till the interval. It's different if you need a wee. But if you don't need a wee, then you're thinking, I wonder how long to the interval. It just means that your attention has slipped slightly, or that your attention has flagged. Flagged is a good word. And, I mean, this is Samuel Beckett, so it's not exactly... what's the word you'd use for what it isn't? Because it is very funny, but it's not a whodunit, let's say. I mean, there's not a lot of, plot. There's not a lot of plot involved. And at this new production at the Haymarket Theatre, starring Lucian Musumati and Ben Whishaw, I didn't check my watch once. And that is rare. I think I even checked it in Hamilton, just to get an idea of when the interval was coming up or when the end was. I didn't check it once. Arguably, certainly the best thing I've seen on the London stage in a very long time, and I'm very lucky to be able to see a lot of stuff on the London stage. But if you do, by any chance, get the opportunity to see that, and you like Beckett, or you think you might like Beckett if you saw a brilliant production of it, then let me put that at the very top of your list. Mark's in Wickford. Mark, what made you pick up the phone with regard to Moira Stewart and the sinister business of scams?
It's just to say that people shouldn't feel silly.
Good. I agree.
I set up a business just before COVID with the intention of buying and selling containers, shipping containers.
Oh, yeah.
And the COVID pandemic hit a couple of months later. Nothing had really happened. And I actually had COVID and was laying on the sofa at home. My son came into the lounge and sort of said, "Oh, Dad, there's a guy outside wants to pick up some boxes or something like that, some containers." I said, "Oh, okay." So I looked at my wife. I said, "What's that about?" She said, "It must be the next man. He must have come to pick up some parcels or something."
Right.
She then came back into the house. She said, "I think you better come outside." So I said, "Okay, fine." So I literally lifted myself off the sofa with great effort because I had COVID before the vaccines, and got to the front door only to find an articulated lorry outside with a gentleman standing there, and he was looking at me and he said, "I've come to pick up a couple of shipping containers."
Oh, Lord.
And I said, "I don't really know what you mean." And he said, and he was the owner of this company. It was a big transport company. And he said, I've bought about 10 shipping containers off you, but we haven't been able to contact you.
Right.
I said, "I really don't know what you mean, what you're talking about."
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I paid you an awful lot of money for 10 shipping containers." So I said, "Where did you pay the money to?" And he explained, and I handed him my phone, which had the company's bank account on it, and you could see that he hadn't paid that bank account.
Right.
And he was the first of about 10 people that contacted me over the next couple of weeks.
Oh, God.
And what had happened, I'd opened this company without buying a domain name or a website. Somebody very clever then built a website. They'd put an address for the yard, which was in Basildon in Essex, not far from where I'm calling from now.
Yeah.
And they'd set it all up, and it turned out after over about 3 or 4 week period, it started with that first one, but I think they'd probably sold about £100,000 worth of upfront payments for containers, which didn't exist. Obviously, I was getting a lot of abusive phone calls. It was easy to trace me through LinkedIn because people were looking at the company name on Company's House, finding me on LinkedIn, getting my phone number.
Which is why they believed it was real in the first place.
Yeah.
Because you were exposed and transparent. You were there. So you hadn't really set up yet properly. You just set up the bones of the business to get going when things calmed down a bit or when you got better.
That's it. I had a Barclays bank account, so it was bona fide. The company that they were paying was some offshore, whatever it was. But these were really clever people. Not only and the people that were buying them were really clever. It was companies, charities, individuals. I got scammed without realising it. Well, the first thing I did was went to trading standards. I contacted the police. That was okay. So I cleared my name very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But I think it even made it onto one of these BBC TV programmes with Gloria Hunniford and one of the others.
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
And what happened to the people that paid money? Because
I really don't know.
Do you not know? Because it's hard to see who would be responsible for refunding that, really.
Yeah, that's it. They paid a lot of money out. It ran into hundreds of thousands of pounds.
So you must have given this a lot of thought. What do you think happened? They saw that you had set up a business and then went to see whether or not it was operational, clocked that it wasn't, set up one that looked like it was, and had all roads leading back to you?
Yes. That's exactly what they did.
Makes you wonder, doesn't it, how... I mean, they must just spend all day looking for opportunities like this.
Yeah, they're extremely clever people.
How long had it been registered at Companies House?
Oh, less than a year.
So they're looking at every newly registered company, looking for the ones, because it doesn't, just one customer would justify their investment, wouldn't it?
People were paying the full amount for the containers up front without ever having seen them. And on average,
well, you would.
I
mean, a container's a container, isn't it? Really, give or take a few dinks and dents. You're not looking for. And I mean, crikey, that's absolutely chilling. Did you stay in that sector? Did you run away at 100 miles an hour?
No, I since then I'm now a taxi driver in Whitford. I've spoken to Nick Ferrari before because I listen to you all day long, so it's great.
Good man. So a slightly easier life. I don't think you can get. Well, I don't want to tempt fate, but I don't think you can get scammed as a taxi. And also, you did absolutely nothing wrong.
No, that's right.
You could not have done anything differently, except possibly be doing searches for your own company online in case somebody was trading under false pretenses using your company. But who the hell would think that was a thing?
That was it. And the first time I saw the website was that they'd produced was when I realised people were buying shipping containers. I mean, it happened in a very, very short period of time from this first person turning up the door.
Yeah.
I had an office based at my mum's house as well, and she rang me late at night and said, "We've got two gentlemen here with big dogs and all this sort of thing." And she then said to the gentleman, "Look, you better come in and have a cup of tea, and my son will explain it to you." And he said, "All right." So he told the guy with the dogs to get back in the car because they knew they'd been conned.
Oh my days.
So yeah, it was an interesting time, but the police dealt with it, and trading standards dealt with it, and fortunately,
I'm so glad you're listening today, because this is the Moira Stewart principle, isn't it? People who are pointing out if it can happen to us, it can happen to anyone, and you've got
it can happen to anybody,
absolutely anybody, and the clever they get cleverer and cleverer and cleverer, and it's often the thing I think about the poacher gamekeeper analogy, or the idea, because I think about this with the tax, with the HMRC. And legal tax avoidance. But the people that are being paid to help people do legal tax avoidance are going to be paid so much more than the people at the HMRC who are... so they are just a sort of cleverness quotient here. And I often think, what would happen if the people that are putting all this cleverness and originality into... Surely they could make a decent crust doing legal things. They don't have to be running around the place ripping people off, but that just shows how naive I am. Thank you, Mark. Ollie's in Brighton. Ollie, what would you like to say?
Hi, I just want to reiterate the previous caller that it can happen to anyone. I think my granddad was a chartered accountant, so I think that's someone that you probably trust with.
Yeah.
Previously, you'd probably trust with money. And then he had a stroke in 2018, which obviously left him. I think he got off quite lightly, but still definitely played havoc with his brain a bit. And one day he just got a random call completely by chance with all the classic, can you just confirm this transaction? It looks like you've had some money stolen and all of that. And because of his state, he was completely going along with it. Obviously got him to transfer money. I think he'd had access to a business's bank account that wasn't his because of what he'd been doing as his job.
Yes.
And transferred 20 grand to these people, and because of the way the state that his brain in was so convinced that he was right, my grandma was phoning my parents up, sort of saying, "What do? I don't think this is right," and we had to get her to unplug the phone line. It was that bad.
Really?
And just
Did he get it back?
He got it back from the bank, but the aftermath for him, I mean, in some ways it's good because every phone call now for him, he's now got dementia, but every phone call for him now he thinks it's a scam, which is good in the sense of he's not going to lose more money, but he spent probably 6 months telling everyone that he was going to go and kill himself, which I think was quite hard on us as a family.
Oh, God, yeah, because it's his sense of worth. It's his sense of self almost, isn't it? That generation finds it hard to separate professional from personal. And when it comes to who you are, I am an accountant. This is what I do. And that would just hit him so hard.
Yeah, for someone that's done it for their entire life.
Exactly.
And has always been in charge, always known what they're doing. I think that first hit for him that something's gone wrong and it's his fault, or he feels that it's his fault. It's not been tough. But I think, it's right to talk about it. I think Henry Riley did a similar thing before, and I texted a similar story. But it's.
Are you suggesting that I'm picking up where Henry Riley left off?
No, I think you're expanding on it perfectly.
Sake, man, honestly, the lad is in a hurry. But goodness me, I didn't realise my heels were being snapped at already. I'm joking. Thank you, Ollie. So don't answer the phone. Well, I mean, the bank will never ring you. Sometimes you can put a name into the text field so it looks like you're being rung by the bank, or you can do spoofs. And always, if just a little thing I started with, when you do a search on a search engine, whether it's Google or anything else, you because you can pay to come to the top of it, there's no guarantee that the top research result will be the thing that you were looking for. So my tiny little example is a little acorn from which all these oak trees have grown in the course of this conversation, where I nearly just paid £1 to find out where my parcel was. And the reason for that was simply because of a perfectly legal, I presume, search engine optimization program. So I'll say it again: if it can happen to Moira Stewart, it can happen to anyone. It's 12:47. 12:49. Trying to establish a telephone link to Lebanon, which is reasons I'm sure I don't need to explain, is a little harder than it would usually be. But rather fortuitously, it gives us an opportunity to talk to Mark in Plymouth. Now, you remember Mark in Wickford was a victim of a form of identity theft, and some scammers set up a company offering to sell shipping containers that didn't exist, and he didn't realise the extent of the scam success until people turned up on his own doorstep with a massive lorry expecting to pick up some shipping containers, and someone else turned up on his mum's doorstep where the office was registered with a vicious dog on a string, designed to sort of menace the people they thought had ripped them off. Now, Mark in Plymouth has rung in with, I suppose it depends how many people listen to the programme, and as you know, it's more than anybody else in the history of phone-in shows or talk radio on commercial radio in the UK. But when coincidences like this happen, it's pretty special. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, James. Yes, I'm one of the unfortunate people that tried to purchase one of these containers.
Oh, my days. And you're pretty confident it's the same fella?
Oh, I'm 99.9% certain it's the same fella.
Incredible.
And we were in the, I run a business, I like to think I'm fairly astute.
Of course.
We've got checks in place, so we know what we're doing. We're dealing with new people, we thought. So we needed a container. I Googled it, found this company that was selling shipping containers. They weren't particularly cheap, but they were slightly cheaper than anybody else. Well, that's good.
Even that's clever, isn't it?
Yeah, not sillily cheap.
So it wasn't too good to be true.
Like no, £300 maybe cheaper than the nearest one. I thought that's good.
Yeah.
Checked them out on Company's House. There they were. Checked their website.
There it is.
The address matched the website address. I thought that's great. I then phoned the telephone number that was on it. Very nice guy spoke to me. I said, can I have some photographs? Sent me photographs of containers. He then emailed me an invoice, everything all matched, bank statement, bank details were on the invoice. I thought, well, this is great. I said, obviously, do you do delivery? He said, yes. He said, but that's no problem. That's done with a third-party company. Just pay the delivery driver when he turns up with your container. I said, oh, yeah, that would be great. Thank you very much. Invoice came through. I passed it through to our accounts team. They paid it. Now, to be fair, that's where we possibly made a slight mistake.
I've got someone in Beirut waiting to talk to me.
Oh, no, cut me off. No worries.
I mean, did you get your money back? That was
no, not at all. It was our fault. We made the payment.
That's what we feared when we were talking to the other Mark in Wickford, wasn't it? That this would. Well, there you go. Everyone be warned, and a little lesson there in just how many people are listening to this radio program these days. Timur Azari is the Iraq bureau chief for the Reuters news agency. It's a big patch from Beirut to Baghdad. He's currently in Beirut in Lebanon, where reports tell us more than 550 people have been killed in Israeli strikes since Monday. Can you give us an idea, Timur, of what that means on the ground as opposed to simple statistics in headlines?
Thanks for having me on, James. I mean, what this means basically is that people are terrified and they don't know what's going to happen next. This is completely unprecedented. We haven't seen numbers like this since the Lebanese civil war, when you had massacres happening. Hezbollah and Israel fought a 2006 war. It lasted 34 days. Over the 34 days, 1,200 people were killed. And in one day yesterday, we have basically half of that. So the numbers are staggering. And then when you speak to people, there was a mass exodus from the south of the country, which borders Israel. Tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of people leaving overnight, some of them sleeping in the streets, spending hours and hours on a road that usually would take about an hour to get from the south to Beirut. And now there's people living in shelters, which are, schools, not bomb shelters, because Lebanon doesn't have bomb shelters like Israel does. These are schools that are repurposed for people to live in. Lebanon already was in a crisis. You might remember that massive port explosion we had in 2020. There was a financial crisis the year before that. Things have been getting worse and worse. And here's another blow.
I often feel that it's a slightly luxurious perspective to sit in London and ask questions like the one I'm about to ask you. But what is the received opinion or your personal opinion on what Netanyahu's purpose and or end game is here?
The Israelis have been quite clear that what they want to do is change the situation in the north, as they call it. The day after the Hamas attack on October 7th, Hezbollah joined the fight, started firing at Israel. Israel started firing back.
That's
Since
important.
then,
that's important context, isn't it? Because it is war in a sense, two directional war.
It has displaced tens of thousands of Israelis. It's displaced around 100,000 Lebanese. And what the Israelis say is that they need to change the situation so those people can return. Now, we do have to remember that Israel has the most right-wing government in its history, with people in key positions who were formerly labeled terrorists by the Israelis.
Yes.
So Hezbollah has picked a fight with a government that really has no love lost with this group, and that goes both ways. So yes, the Israeli intentions are of course viewed with skepticism here, that they're seen sort of as, in a way personally tied to Netanyahu's situation, but also, tied to the wider context of this, which is, that the Israelis want to return these people to the north. The question is whether this achieves that. I mean, what we've seen is that ever since this escalation that's now a week in the making between Israel and Hezbollah, Hezbollah has fired rockets deeper into Israel, leading hundreds of thousands of people, according to Israeli tallies, to sleep in bomb shelters. So it's clear that that's not working so far. And there's a lot of skepticism around the world, really, from world leaders about whether this kind of a move will return people to the north. Israel occupied southern Lebanon for 20 years, from the 80s until around 2000. And the idea there was to have this buffer zone that protects Israel. 20 years later, they withdrew. It didn't work. So there's a question now of basically how you deal with this issue. Hezbollah is there. They are present in villages and towns, and it's going to be very hard to get them out.
For people listening in the UK who don't have a deep knowledge of the region or indeed the history, what is the likelihood of this developing into a sort of form of attrition comparable to what we've seen in Gaza? Hezbollah remains a more viable fighting force than Hamas, I think.
Definitely. Everything we know about Hezbollah is that they're much more professional, much more well-equipped, heavily armed than Hamas, and a war between these two parties will be much more serious, much more violent. Hezbollah have said, they said a few days ago that, their leader said that they are willing to continue this fight no matter the consequences. They have said that this is a support front for Gaza. They have linked themselves to that front. And they say they will continue, again, no matter the consequences. We have to remember, in the 2006 war, which started when Hezbollah kidnapped Israeli soldiers, it was very destructive. And at the end of it, the leader of Hezbollah came out and said that if he had known the destruction, he wouldn't have done it.
Right.
This time he's saying, I'm going to do it no matter the consequences. And we've seen in the past couple of days that, the impact, the consequences have been extremely high. And we're just at the beginning of this, it seems. As we speak right now, the Israeli military says it's striking more targets and it's going to expand these operations.
To be clear, you see literally as we speak right now.
Yeah.
I just out of interest, Timur, does Reuters report this as an attack upon Hezbollah or as an attack upon Lebanon?
Reuters is a news agency that reports what people say,
Yes.
and we give the context, right? So Israel says it is striking Hezbollah targets. The Lebanese health ministry says 50 children and more than 90 women have been killed in this out of 558 people killed. So you're talking about 10% kids, 20% women. We put those facts in front of our viewers and we let them determine, how they see it. So that's the situation here. Israel says it's striking Hezbollah. The Israelis did say, in messages before the strikes began that Lebanese living around Hezbollah, munitions should leave. But, to be honest, it was seen with a bit of ridicule in Lebanon because you're not really going to know if there's a rocket placed under your house or near your house, right? I mean, it's not like there's a map of these things.
No.
So, in fact, what you've actually seen is just a mass exodus from the south. People are terrified. This fighting has been going on for months, almost a year now. This is the first time we've seen this kind of movement, right? We're really at mass displacement right now.
And finally, why now? Why this escalation now? Given, as you say, that the missiles have been exchanged since October the 7th.
It's been simmering for a long time. There was an incident in July, which the Israelis blamed on Hezbollah, where a rocket killed 12 kids
on the football pitch. On the football pitch.
Exactly.
Yes.
And since then, we've really been in this escalation. It's been steadily escalating. The Israelis killed a senior Hezbollah commander. Then we had those pager explosions last week. It was only a week ago. It feels like months. The walkie-talkies the next day. More bombardment, them hitting a tower in the southern suburbs, again, killing Hezbollah commanders, but also many civilians. And we've just been going from there. I do have to note here that, the situation in Lebanon is very different than 2006, in the sense that Lebanon had a lot of friends in 2006. It had Gulf partners. It had, the French. It had a lot of goodwill. We're in a very different place today. Few statesmen recognized internationally. Hezbollah seen as having taken over a lot of the Lebanese state. And, a lot of people, to be frank, don't mind seeing Hezbollah take a beating. And so there's a question here about where we go. How much willingness, how much interest is there from the international community who have failed to stop Gaza for a year to stop Lebanon as well?
Wow. And what a point to end our conversation, which I think, to speak to your final point, will not be the last time we speak. Timur Azari, the Iraq bureau chief there for Reuters. Currently in Beirut, in Lebanon. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Do download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Ferguson.